How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Artisans of Steel podcast. This day, I don't know what I was going to say. This month, this month, I have a very talented maker whose work I've admired for quite a long time, and I'm very excited to talk to him today about various technical approaches and the way he runs his business is very impressive. He's really a great maker and a productive maker. Honestly, it's impressive to see. But before we get to him, I just want to go through and share about our super sponsors this month. These are our super sponsors over on the Patreon. Um, if you want to join the Patreon, you can go to patreon.com or just search Maumasi Patreon. That's Maumasi Patreon, and that'll pull it up pretty dang quick. I also have links in like my Instagram bio that will take you to the Patreon as well. We have various levels at which you can join and participate in the community that we've built there. We have our own private Discord where we chat and help each other out, as well as also doing these live conversations with talented makers like Ben Kamon that we're talking to today, where you can become part of the conversation, ask questions directly to these makers. And so, but before we get to the conversation, again, I'm going to talk about our super sponsors. Our first super sponsor is Michael Poor. He's Red Dragon Forge on Instagram. You can find him cooking and forging, all this stuff. He's a very talented dude. He's a great guy. He's a big part of our Patreon, our Discord community, and he's super helpful there. He's overall just an awesome dude. He lives just like an hour or two away from me too. We've been talking for a long time about getting together, and I think we finally got to make it happen soon. So go give him a follow on Instagram at Red Dragon Forge. Excuse me. All right, next up we have Russell Tinsley. He is Ouzelfinch Beers. He's the owner of Ouzelfinch Beers in Virginia. He's also has a maker page called Can't Make Knives. Which is not true anymore. He knows how to make knives now. He's another good dude. He's been working with a lot of very talented people, and I think he won a contest recently where he was able to go take a class at the New England School of Metalwork, learning from more talented makers. But if you haven't had Ouzelfinch Beers, that's Oozle Finch beer, Finch like the bird. Beers. They make a lot of really awesome creative flavors and flavored beers that are way outside the box. They're so good though, but they're combinations of things that you never would expect, like peanut butter beer or like lemon bar beer. All these crazy things that we love in the normal world, but you don't expect to drink it and love it as well. And I do, and they're awesome. And if you go to your local beer market and they don't have Ouzelfinch there, talk to the buyer about getting Ouzelfinch in, because I guarantee it's not going to be a wasted investment. All of those beers are going to go for them, and it's a great opportunity to try new stuff. Again, go check out Russell Tinsley at Can't Make Knives and Ouzelfinch Beers. All right, next up we have Dan Hubbs of 66 Mountain Knives. He's on Instagram and Facebook at 66 Mountain Knives. He's another great guy who took a class of mine actually recently. Well, recently, I guess that was about 3 months ago now. But he's already starting to put some of that knowledge that he took from the class to use, and he's doing some really cool work with some of the gradient patterns and using them in kind of more conventional patterns, but the extra depth and texture that it adds to the steel really makes it pop. He's got a pair that he's working on right now that are contrasting in finish, but both look awesome. So go check him out. He's a great guy. Give him a follow at 66 Mountain Knives. Next, we have Lawrence Lake. He's Maritime Knife Supply. You can find him on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Maritime Knife Supply, as well as at maritimeknifesupply.com. He currently, if you're only catching this episode just now, on the 28th, or today is the 27th of December, as this is being recorded, he has a sale going on actually right now, a Boxing Day sale that goes to the 28th of December. So if you guys are catching this live over in the Patreon, or if you're catching it later in the day, he has not only the ability to provide for Atlantic Canada or across Canada, but he also can get your materials to you from all across the U.S. And he gets it to you in a very timely manner. He's a great guy, trying to do his best to take care of makers and get materials to them and machines, honestly, machinery as well, and tools, and all at as best of a price as you can find out there. So go give Lawrence some love and support at maritimenifesupply.com. Next up is Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Forge, as well as Anchorage Brewing. I've been very fortunate to work with Gabe, and he is a very talented maker. He really has hit the ground running. There are some makers out there who have a natural talent for doing this work, and he is definitely one of those guys. I mean, he already comes from a background of working with his hands, so he has some competency there for sure, but that really parlayed into knife making very nicely. And he hasn't even been making knives for a couple of years yet, and he's already doing some really phenomenal work, creating really great patterns and making really great chef's knives and hunting knives. And if you haven't tried Anchorage beers, go to your local beer market. They might have it there, but if they don't, definitely ask them to get it in. They're some of the best beers I've ever tasted in my life. They do a lot of they do a lot of I was going to say a lot of imperial beers, but they they do a lot of the lower ABV beers as well that have incredible flavor. Gabe is a very talented brewer for sure. And so make sure you go check him out and follow him on Instagram at Anchorage Brewing, as well as Anchorage Forge. Next up, we have Eric Kidwell. He is on Instagram at District202 LLC. He's been part of the knife making community for a very long time, and he's getting his shop set up currently for embarking on his own knife making journey. But I will be seeing him actually down in in Casa Grande, Arizona, which is about an hour north, I believe, of Tucson, Arizona, where he will be kind of like the point man when it comes to covering the hammer in at the Travis Worts Hammer in March. I believe let me just check my calendar actually really quick. I don't want to throw a date out there that's wrong. It's March 16th and 17th is when the Travis Worts Hammer is. I don't know if tickets are on sale yet, but they keep an eye out to get tickets, to come check us out, come hang out with me and Eric. I'll be there demonstrating and teaching down at the Travis Worts Hammer, and then following that actually with a class at the Tucson Desert Metalcraft School in Tucson, Arizona, ran by my friend Rich Greenwood. I'll be teaching a Mosaic Damascus Advanced Pattern Theory and Damascus Theory class at the Tucson, I keep wanting to call it Tucson Metalworks. It's Desert Metal Craft. Okay, so again, go check out Eric Kidwell at District 202 LLC on Instagram. And then finally, we have not Justin. My gosh, my brain's moving faster than my mouth can talk. Josh Weston. Josh Weston is a very talented friend of mine. I love the guy. I love his work. He's super creative. And he actually earlier in December, he had an interview with Artful.Awareness Portal on Instagram. So they're at Artful.Awareness Portal, where he talks about his creative process in creating art and knives and how he involves that and interweaves that into his life. He's a great guy, and that's a great opportunity to get a better understanding of who he is as a person over on that interview. Go check him out. Give him some love. He's on Instagram at Josh A. Weston, as well as at Dragon Forge Experience, which will probably be up and running again next spring, just in a few months. And so without further ado, I want to bring Ben in, and I want to thank him for being here for this conversation. Ben Kamon, he's on Instagram at Kamon Knives. He hails from, it starts with the A. I can't even think of Austria.
Yeah, Austria.
I
Sorry.
was like, I can't even think of it. All of a sudden, my brain died for a second.
It's a small
Hail from
country.
Austria.
Don't worry.
But I like I was saying earlier, I have admired your work for a very long time. I can't remember when it first came on my radars, maybe four 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know how long you've actually been making knives, but that's when it first came on my radar, and I was like, whoa, look at those. And I really like the aesthetic. Um, overall, but they also looked like great performing knives. And I think that was the thing that really drew me to what you're doing. And you do a really great job of documenting, like, not only your process, but what the knives actually look like. People ask me about photographing knives, and I try to tell them, like, take pictures of the knives as if the person was able to hold the knife itself and look at it.
Yeah,
Imagine what that would look like, and then photograph that thing. And you do such an awesome job of taking pictures in such a way that it looks like you're actually holding the piece, rather than it just being like a blanket kind of overall shot from afar. You get really up and close and personal, all into the nitty gritty details, and I love that. But you're doing some really great work that I admired for a long time, as well as being a highly productive maker. It's very impressive. I was just telling you before we started, I was looking through your Instagram, and I think your most recent drop was like 20 knives or 25 knives or something like that. I'm just like, God, I can't remember making that many knives at one time. I think the last time I did knives like that, or was producing at that level, production level, was when I was working for Bob Kramer. I did that for 3 years, busting ass like that. And it's a lot. I know it's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work, and it's impressive to
yeah.
see you doing it over and over the years. But thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Man, I'm very excited. Thank you for having me, and thanks for all the kind words. I'm kind of out of words to describe how thankful I am. Very kind. Thanks.
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, and vice versa. I mean, I'm admiring your work for a long time too, and yeah, 4 to 5 years checks out. I mean, I'm self-employed for 5 years in May, I think, or is it
Okay.
6 years? 2019. Yeah, 6 years. In May, it's 6 years.
Okay.
So yeah, and I've got the Instagram and making knives a little before that. So I think I'm making knives or selling knives since 7 to 8 years,
Okay.
round about
Right.
that time.
Well, before we get too deep into the actual knife stuff, I'm just curious what your I like asking everybody, like, what their background, what their family history was a little bit, if they have a history of kind of metal work or any kind of craft work in their family before
Yeah.
them. What was childhood like? What was high school, like early education, high school? Did you go to college? What was all that like? Does that play into your knife making, and how does it lead to your knife making?
Yeah, I mean, the interest in knives generally started or was started by my father. He
Okay.
collected all kinds of small knives, nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but rare knives in a sense, and it was a lot. And I as a kid, always when he got the box out with the knives in them, I was always very excited. Always wanted one, never, or I later got one, but not as often as I wanted one,
Right.
so
Yeah.
he raised the interest in those, and also educated me on maintenance, like sharpening and how to
Mm.
take care of knives, how to
Okay.
use knives,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So we were in the outdoors quite a lot, I'd say, and yeah, folders, little hunting knives. And then I think parallel to that, my mother and also my father, when he got time, always cooked fresh, from
Oh,
scratch.
nice.
And so I think those two early inputs or interests combined kind of led me the way I'm going right now.
Right.
So cooking was important, or eating and cooking less when I was a child, of course, eating,
Sure.
but when you move out and still enjoy eating, then you
Right.
have to get creative with the cooking as well.
Yeah.
um yeah, later I mean, I went to school, but I was never really good in school, so
Oh,
I dropped out in what is it? It should be high school. It's not university. It's before that. It's. I think it's high school.
Yeah,
Yeah,
at least in the United States, yeah, it's high school.
yeah, yeah. That's about that. I dropped out. Then I made an apprenticeship in a metalworking job. I was a truck trailer mechanic. There I
Okay,
learned welding, bending sheet metal, pneumatics, electronics, and all that. I learned that there. And after that, after mandatory military time in
okay.
Austria, that's about 6 months. It's nothing crazy.
Oh wow.
Um, I got to be a blacksmith for ornamental blacksmithing,
Okay,
and that was a really fun time for me. I had not really big experience in forging before. My father had a little forge, hobby forging, and
okay,
stuff like that. So I've seen it before. I've held a hammer and used an anvil before, but not educated in that uh,
sure.
branch, or yeah, in that um, job. So for 7 years and learned it on the fly, so to
Oh wow.
say.
Yeah.
Um, and from there, the knife making started. So we had sometimes really not a lot of work, and then for 1 or 2 years after I started, I maintained the shop, cleaned the shop and all that. But I mean, at some point, the shop is maintained and clean. And then I
Right.
approached my boss at the time that we could maybe make knives and sell them, because we have the infrastructure, we have the power hammers, the forge, and all that. And maybe we can have like a second branch within the metalworking company he owned. And so
Okay.
we started, or I started making the knives, and later on sold them. And yeah, that's how that started with the knives, really.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
great. So, and you've been on it. I know you've been on Jeff Fader's podcast a few times. I
Yeah.
guess I think he said like 6 times or something like that now.
Yeah.
Um, and so I hope nobody feels like this conversation is repetitive because I wasn't part of those conversations. So I'm very curious to just sit and chat with you for directly to kind of get to know you myself personally. But that's cool. So you worked metal fabricating for how long before you started making knives?
7 years. It was, I mean, yeah,
Yes.
7 years ornamental blacksmithing and metal fabrication. It
Okay.
was a company that did both.
Okay.
And yeah, the knives were going good. And after some time, since I handled all the customer emails regarding knives and the Instagram and all that,
Yeah.
um, I started to have what was a 40-hour work week go up to about 50 to 60 hours work
Oh
week,
wow.
because I handled the social media and emails in my free time, so to say.
Oh wow.
And yeah, I approached my boss and told him, look, I'm working way more and paycheck is the same.
Right.
Um, that doesn't work out for me. And then we parted friendly.
Okay.
I took the risk and got self-employed, because at that time I had one child and the other one was on the way.
Oh
I
wow.
wasn't earning a lot um, where I was, and there wasn't a lot of chances to, go up the, how do you say it, the like getting higher in a company.
Right. Like
Um,
promoted higher up in the
yeah,
yeah.
getting promoted. It was a small company. It was my boss and me, so no chances of
I know.
promotion
I
or
was like,
anything.
you're gonna
Yeah,
take his job.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that
Yeah.
that kind of was the plan, but that would have taken some years because he wasn't that old.
I see.
So yeah, I took the risk and got self-employed, and thankfully it worked out, and I'm very happy with the decision. But at the time, it was nerve wracking.
Yeah. Yeah. Deciding to go and your plan wasn't to start doing fabricating on your own. It was to go into knife making
Yeah,
full time.
directly into knife making. I mean, I had a soft start with the company before, because I acquired customers, I raised
Hmm.
interest in the product. It wasn't like getting self-employed uh, without a developed product, or even a product that was out there. I had all that. The
Yeah.
social media was settled, and the interest of knives were there. I had some customers already. I even, when I left him, I even had some custom orders open where I told
Okay.
the people, look, I'm getting self-employed. It will be delayed, but I'm getting to it once my company is started up, essentially.
Right. Man.
Yeah.
And so the tools and equipment that you were working with, he owned. So then you had to do some work to acquire or build and accumulate
I,
your own shop equipment, or
yeah, some of them, like the big water cooled belt grinder, I
oh
bought
yeah.
from him. I
Okay.
mean, yeah, we bought it um, together before. Then we maintained it or even modified it to work how it currently is,
Yeah.
and then I just bought it off from him because he had no use for it anyways,
Oh, I
and
got you.
I so that's what I said. It was really a friendly uh, um, going apart, or how do you say it in English? I
Yeah.
don't know. It wasn't in a bad way, or yeah.
Right. That's so interesting because there are some people. I've worked with people or for people in the past who and not necessarily in my knife making, but just in other jobs where, I'm working really hard and I'm doing a lot of good work for them, and I think they get used to that, and it feels like it's a good thing that you're getting all this extra work out of somebody without having to pay them more.
Yeah.
And then when that person finally steps up and says, I'm doing a lot of work and I'm doing good work for you, I would like to get compensated, better
Yeah.
compensated for that. They kind of, I think, at least in the States, a lot of people are just like, basically like, fuck you. and, and you can either keep doing what you're doing or I'm going to fire you. And there are a lot of business owners that I've experienced are more willing to lose a high quality employee rather than pay them just a little bit more. And it's just like, you have to go through all of that. If you're going to hire somebody, you got to go through all of that training all over again.
Yeah.
What are you doing? And it seems like a very short-sighted move, especially if you stayed with him and you continued to go in the direction that you did with knives. I mean, maybe eventually you would have gone off onto your own, but you know it, it just seems very short-sighted.
I mean, I think in his defense, the company wasn't making a lot of money to sustain really paying me more like it was. But my
Okay.
suggestion at the time was, since he was a metal fabricator himself but wasn't really working, so the setup
Oh,
was like this: he was acquiring customers and making like customer meetings and all that, writing invoices, things like that, bureaucratic
yeah,
things. And I was mainly working in the shop. And when we had to turn around something heavy or something like that, he helped me. But essentially, I was the mechanic, and my suggestion was
I see.
that he would uh, make more of the ornamental blacksmithing and metalwork.
Yeah.
I'm making knives. We both make more income for his company, and then he can pay me better. But he straight up told me he is not looking forward to working, and he doesn't do it. So it was a
There's a
conscious decision.
reason he has an employee. He doesn't actually want to do that work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least he was upfront with that. He was very
Yeah,
honest and he was very direct, which I appreciate. Of course, at the time I was disappointed because I didn't want to take the risk of getting self-employed. I mean,
sure.
at the time, as I said, I was very scared, but yeah, it worked out fine in retrospect. But at the time, I was nervous, and I would have um, taken the route of staying with him and getting paid by him, but overall making more money for his company.
Hmm.
That would have been my choice. But yeah,
Yeah, that
I
probably
had a
would have.
plan B and executed plan B.
Well, and I'm curious if part of the fear or concern of going out on your own and owning your own business was from the idea that maybe you, because I think a lot of people, especially when they start knife making, um, they feel like they can only sell to their local market. whether it's the city they live in or the state or country they live in. And so I could imagine if you had to only rely on your local market or your the only selling within Austria, that might be a little concerning or scary as to whether or not you can build a successful business out. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people there who would have money or would love to buy your work, but one of the beauties of knife making is that your work can ship around the
Yeah,
world, and there's worldwide appeal versus doing the metal fabrication. You're kind of limited. You're not sending
yeah,
metal fabrication work halfway around the world, right? It's a very difficult and costly thing to do, so you're very limited on where that goes.
exactly.
But I'm curious, what when you first started out, was that part of your fear, or what were some of the fears that you were
I was
confronting?
lucky in that. I mean, that was where I mentioned I had a soft start. The customers
Right.
I had at the time, I really acquired through mainly through forums, I'd say. So the KKF, the kitchen knife
Yep.
forums or
Yep.
forum. I always
Kitchen knife
confuse
forum.
the
Yeah,
two.
I think it's kitchen knife forum.
Yeah, KKF.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it. Who knows and who
Yeah.
doesn't, don't mind.
Yeah.
And the German forum, I really had a lot of customers there, the first customers, I'd say. And then they kind of spread the word on Instagram,
Oh, sure.
parallel to me having an Instagram account, which my friends advised me to get because I had no clue. I had no social media privately before that,
Sure.
and still don't have it privately. So, so that worked out parallel, and so I from the beginning had always international customers, no matter if they just were from Germany, which is
Okay.
close by,
Yeah.
or the USA, pretty early on. And yeah, that was a lucky fact because I knew that the local market is very difficult to, how do you say it, handle or to to work with. I guess. I mean, we had a store, or the shop was kind of in the middle of Vienna. A lot of
Okay.
people going by, and we were making knives and selling them there for about 2 years. And we had one guy show up, and he didn't buy.
Oh,
So
wow.
just from that, yeah. So local market would not have worked out, and would for me not work out to this day, because
Right.
my website is in English. Nobody finds me in German, you know.
Yeah.
So people are surprised. People who are local, who stop by, who eventually find me through Google or whatever,
Yeah.
they are very surprised what I'm doing here, kind of like that.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah.
Wow.
So I was lucky that I had those international customers from the beginning.
And how did you find the kitchen knife forums? Did you just find did you Google search like custom knife makers, or how did you
Good
find the
question.
kitchen knife forums?
I think through the German forums
Okay.
versus cross-linking, I guess.
Okay.
I couldn't even tell you. And
Sure.
the German forums, I really found, being a customer myself, searching for the first, Japanese knives and knives for myself to buy.
Okay.
Funny side fact: at that point, I have the first handmade knife I bought was a Shiro Kamo. He's a Japanese guy
Yeah.
who almost has the same surname as me, but that's not why I bought it. But it's really regarded as a very high performing laser to this day, which is very affordable. I think they still go for around like $160.
Oh,
So
wow.
they're
Super
pretty
affordable.
good knives for the
Yeah.
for the price.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think I found it being the customer at that point. You
I
know,
see.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I can't remember how I even found it, but I think that makes sense as a customer. And I think lately, a lot of people have been struggling with using social media to be able to advertise and market their knives, and to create awareness about their knives. And on Live Talk, we get the question in about, how do we, with the things going on with social media, how do we get our knives out there? How do we help people become aware of the work that we're doing? And I kind of actually forget about the forums, but the forums are actually a really great place, that because they're privately owned, and and so, well, I guess social media is too, But
Yeah.
because it is tailored specifically to kitchen knives, and it's there to help people who are interested in using and buying handmade or quality kitchen knives, where they're spending their time. And so that is where honestly that's probably the best place to market your work to, especially if you're just starting out. um, yeah.
Another advantage is because I really don't like. I mean, it sounds disrespectful, but it's not meant that way. But I don't. It's difficult to sell to laypersons or people who are not used to the kind of kitchen knives we're making.
For
Not
sure.
only for carbon steel, but fine edges,
Yeah.
possibly harder steel, and all that. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate the forum customers because those are nerds like you and me, and
Right.
they, for the most part, know what they are dealing with and what they are doing,
Yeah.
and they know what they want also. So
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, even though they are more demanding, they are an easier customer for me to work with than a layperson.
Right.
uh, at least that's my opinion about them. So I think
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard other knife makers talk differently about it, but I appreciate those guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the forums are a perfect place, but I do think you're right that the people there have a better understanding of what goes into not only, like you said, the maintenance of a carbon steel knife, but how and a better appreciation and understanding for a higher performing knife, and why a handmade knife like the ones you and I are making will sell for a lot more money
Yeah.
than what they will normally find at the local stores or something like that.
Although I will say, I mean, they're very critical at the same time,
Yeah,
especially regarding pricing. I mean, those guys are the
of course.
first to bash on you if they feel the prices are too high or anything. Because I mean, with the education comes the comparability, or they have a lot of other makers to
Yeah,
see where the prices usually are, and when you're going out of the norm, then you're getting fucked pretty quickly. So
yeah.
yeah,
That is another thing that they. It's an interesting atmosphere because they want the best quality knives they can possibly get, but they also want to pay as little as possible for them, and 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 some of that, part of what goes into the price point of a lot of makers knives, especially my knives, is just the amount of time takes me to make the knife. And there are really, like you were talking about, the Japanese knives, there are a lot of really great Japanese makers making really great knives, but they're much simpler,
yeah,
production wise, and so they don't take as much time, so they don't cost as much, really, honestly, more than anything. And that plays a big part into how much an item costs. And I think that's what's really impressive by what you're doing, especially when it comes to production, is you are working in a way that is very smart. I think is very smart production wise, and I think you found a nice balance between doing your production work as well as doing your more creative and kind of artful expression work with your what you call your monolith line of knives, where they're fully forged pieces. Sometimes they have handle inserts, but most often they're just full solid steel pieces,
yeah.
which is really cool. I'd be curious if you can talk about a little bit of striking that balance between doing production or semi-production and full custom, and then like the monolith stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen, but my workbench, my main workbench, where I have the assignments, or the, like, yeah, assignments of the knives,
Yeah.
for every customer, it has 20 places. So I'm usually filling up 10 to 15 with custom knives. They are, I wouldn't say they are boring, but they are the yeah, cash cow, more or less.
The
But they
bread,
are,
a lot of makers in the States call them the bread and butter. They're
yeah,
they're, they're
bread and
what
butter. Exactly,
they're
perfect.
the ones paying the bills.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
I have up to, then I have a few slots for my retailers. So I have to entertain those too. And then I have, and they are knives that I make to my liking. So they are fun
Mm.
already,
Right.
just because of that fact. And then usually I try to mix in one or two projects that I just have fun with. And yeah, the monoliths developed out of that, and some other projects I did before do the same. And they're keeping me going and keeping the fun within the work,
I
I'd
I
say.
have a picture of the handle of one of your monoliths. The blades look very similar to your normal knife work, but the handle is where the magic is, and they're so great. It's so cool.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, what should have or should be said, because I read it a
Okay.
lot on the internet, is that they are one piece. They are not forge welded. They are not purely
Right.
filed out or anything.
Yeah.
They're made pretty much like a bottle opener. So you would punch a small hole, and then you
Right.
would stick it onto the horn of the anvil and forge it upright, so you can spread the material to a big circle,
Yeah.
roughly spoken, and then you'd shape it into a handle shape.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
That's great. You get creative. Like on this one, you have it looks like some material is pinned into the what would be the tang area or the
yeah,
butt of the handle. Is that
yeah,
mokome?
yeah, exactly. That is Mokume I had laying around. I made it myself a few years ago, but
Oh,
didn't
cool.
use it. Hmm?
I say cool. I didn't know
Yeah,
that. That's great. I haven't made that. I haven't made mokame myself.
it's not too big of a deal. You produce yourself a clamp, two steel plates and four threaded rods with
Yeah.
holding it together. Then you stack up copper, and in this case it's copper and brass. Stack it up, paint it with borax that is solved in water, so it gets sticky and gooey.
Sure.
uh, you seal it up, and then you put it in the oven at the right temperature. I think I did it at 900 degrees Celsius, but
Sure.
better look it up yourself. What
Yeah.
what temperature, because I don't want you to make a mistake or anything.
Sure.
Um, and then you let it soak for I think 20 to 30 minutes, so it's up to temp, and that's it. Then it's forge welded, and then or forge welded. I don't even know if you can say that like that,
No,
but I think
I think it's called a solid state diffusion welded bond.
okay, yeah, then it's that.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and then you have to be careful with the temperatures, because brass melts at very low temperatures, but you
Sure.
can essentially forge it out or just anneal it and then cold forge it. Um,
And of course, if you're cold forging it, you kind of, as far as I know, at least, I've never really done this myself, but I feel like you have to anneal it every once in a
yeah,
while.
yeah,
Otherwise, it'll work harden and then it'll start to fall apart, basically.
yeah, or crack, yeah, exactly.
On crack, yeah, yeah. No, that's cool, and I think that's I think that's great that you have that model set up for yourself because honestly, what you're doing, a lot of people should be looking a lot closer at because it's very smart. Um, that way, you have your bread and butter, the things that pay your bills, and get into people's hands, and probably also get into people's hands at a little bit more maybe a affordable price than what they would either get from your retailers or some of the more passion projects like the monolith pieces, um, because just be simply because of the extra amount of time that goes into those other kind of tiers, I guess you can call them. How do you refer to the different levels of knives that you're making?
I refer to them as tiers, and I didn't really have them separated clearly in a marketing sense, I'd say.
Sure.
But I pretty early had what I call production knives. So I
Hmm.
made two runs of really stock removal, batch of 30 not customizable production knives, and I made two batches of them. I made one batch with Toma from
Oh, nice.
Florentine Kitchen Knives.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. That was just in the last year or two, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I mean that's a middle thing. That's kind of production, since they haven't been customizable, but
Right.
they were higher end than my first production lines. The
Yeah.
first two production lines really were a super simple POM plastic handle,
Okay.
plain stock removal carbon steel, like ball bearing steel, but the tool steel equivalent. So a little less quality than ball bearing steel.
Okay.
Yeah, then I have the middle tier, I'd say, with the takedown handle
Okay.
mono steel knives. So the
Yeah.
majority of what you see on my Instagram is that. And then I would say the high end things are the stainless Sanmai, the monoliths.
Right.
I made one integral knife, things like those. Those
Yeah.
are the like the highest tier, or yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love it. Um, yeah, I think I made the mistake of trying to make the best work that I could do my bread and butter. And what ended up happening when I was doing custom orders, I don't do custom orders anymore, but mistakes happen along the way in any of the processes. But with the higher end stuff, usually if a mistake is a little bit more costly and time intensive,
Yeah.
and and that kept setting things back. And I think if I could start over, um, I mean, I guess I don't need to start over. I maybe pivot, but I would like to structure the model of doing things a little bit, honestly, a little bit more like what you got going on, where you have kind of a bread and butter production style that is it. It gets your monthly nut, right off the top, pays the bills and everything, and it's straightforward, and there limited modifications, if any modifications, and then have a little bit more, and then have the other stuff that's a little bit more passion driven and artfully exploratory, um, for your own personal sanity, honestly, more than
Yeah.
anything. Yeah, because it can't, if it's just bread and butter all day every day, which I
Yeah.
did that when I worked for Bob. It was just production nonstop, and it's not fun. It's
It's a
easy to
job.
burn out. Yeah, it's a job, and it's very easy to burn out and stop enjoying it. And so striking that balance is what you've done to strike that balance is really, really impressive, and I admire it a lot.
Thanks, man. I mean, I have to say, I told you I was scared to get self-employed, so I
Yeah,
had a super strong urge to spread my, how do you say it, portfolio or whatever, as far as possible. So I worked hard to establish a production line.
yeah,
And that was really in order. My thinking behind it was, I mean, not only was it fun in a sense, but
yeah,
my thinking behind it was, as long as I have as I have options to
yeah.
buy for the customer in every thinkable price range, my thinking was that I can always go one direction or the other depending on where the demand is, you know.
Mm,
And so that really motivated to put them out there. Nowadays, I mean, I think the last production run I made was 2020, so it's a
okay,
few years back.
right.
And nowadays I don't get to it because custom orders of the middle range knives um, are so demanded. So I mean, the plan worked out, you could say, because
Yeah,
I don't have the time for the other knives anymore. But the urge was or the I had a very strong urge to just have a lot of options.
yeah,
Let's put it that way. Yeah.
yeah. That's good. Because
Yeah.
that flex, especially starting out, I think it's really important for people to have that flexibility. But I think as you advance or progress as a maker, you position yourself to do more of what you want, especially as you start to build reputation and desire for your work. It also creates for you kind of a bit of freedom in the way of how you run your business and how you make knives. Because once you get to a point where basically anything you make you can sell, then that's the sweet spot. um, yeah, I at least that's what it feels like to me right now. Is I feel very fortunate that I've gotten to that place, um, because the customs, I was really struggling with this customs a lot, But again, I think I structured it wrong. I was trying to do my best work as my bread and butter, and now and that would just wore me down and burned me out.
No, I mean, I get it.
Yeah,
Customs are a lot of work. I mean, I'm currently, and I'm very sorry to every customer who listens to it. I'm so far back with emails
yeah,
because I had to put the last batch out before Christmas, then Christmas holidays at home, kids, and all that.
yeah,
And I think I have a few emails in my inbox that are 3 or 4 weeks old,
mm,
just because I didn't get to it because custom orders are very demanding, and I get that, and I struggle with it too. But at the same time, I enjoy it for the creative input also, because I
sure,
mean, I oftentimes have customers have really good ideas,
right,
and also challenge me to do something out of my comfort zone, but not too much, because
sure,
when it gets too much, I'm just saying no.
right,
But just slightly out of my comfort zone, maybe, and then it turns out to be a good idea, and I enjoy that. Yeah, but custom orders for me, they are important. I kind of see my customers um almost as brand ambassadors, because and that
mm,
developed organically in the sense that I I wasn't able to decline existing customers, so they always had a place in my books. So I ended up with customers who have several knife of mine, but
mhm,
new customers not being able to place an order with me,
yeah,
But and that sounds counter, or it sounds bad uh, in a business sense, but what's good about it is that those customers really spread the word. They are very happy customers, otherwise they
right,
wouldn't order so often,
sure,
and they go into forums or their social media, post about it, and really say nothing but good things about your knives. And also there is a benefit in the sense that they know you, you know them, they know your wording about your products. The ordering process is far easier than with a new customer who might not know that.
right,
um so yeah, and it was totally unconsciously. I always only in retrospect I noticed that it kind of works that way, and I'm very, very happy with that. But of course, there is also a downside, like always, that potentially new customers are very unhappy because they can't get onto the books and they are disappointed. Oftentimes, I had um, a few emails with guys that who were very not understanding. They
mm,
just didn't understand how I would decline them, or not decline the or decline. Is it decline?
yeah, decline,
Yeah,
not
how I
sell
could,
to them,
yeah,
yeah,
how I could do that, because they would pay me and all that, and I said, look, I'm just a one man show. My time is
yeah.
limited. My books are full. I can't do it. But
Yeah,
they
that
were
always
not understanding
astonishes
it.
me. People's sense of entitlement, essentially, that's what that
Yeah.
is somebody feels entitled to your work, like you owe it to them. And I'm just like, what? What are you talking about?
I think they just don't understand it, and I mean, partly I get it. They don't have the insights. I always make an effort of explaining it, but
Sure.
despite that, some will just not understand it.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, but generally, I try to be, um, you know, not patient, how to friendly with guys and explain things.
Yeah.
But yeah, my friends always tell me I should not justify myself, but I don't see it like that. I think people really have to be educated. I wouldn't know if I
Sure.
wasn't in my position. I wouldn't know either. So I
Sure.
think,
I think that's
yeah,
fair. And I think that's very gracious of you. That's to offer to take that time to offer that education, because you're right, they don't know any better, really. But and I think there also, taking a step back, at first it's easy. I think it's easy to feel defensive and to be like, "Oh, these fucking people are so self-entitled." But the reality, I mean, part of it is kind of that, but the other part that's hard to see sometimes is that they're just somebody who's really loves your work, and they're really excited at the potential of maybe owning some of your work, and then they're disappointed
yeah,
because they don't get to. And so then they get into defensive mode of trying to justify why they think they deserve to own your work, or why you owe it to them to make them some work or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts to get kind of weird, because
Yeah.
when people think they deserve to own some of what you're, whatever it is you're doing. It's like,
I mean, the vast majority is all right.
yeah,
I'd say 90+% are super cool with it
right.
and know it anyways. Um, those are the educated customers. The forums guys, you know, they will never give you shit because they know how it works.
Yeah,
But sometimes you get a customer who's super interested, and yeah, I mean, I get it, and it's a downside for me as well. It's very unsatisfying to decline people, you know, to say no to people who are genuinely willing to pay for what you put out there.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I try to look at it as a matter of time only. I'm not going away, and I'm thinking it's only a matter of time until they could get their hands on some knives of mine if they are patient enough.
yeah.
I hope they are, but yeah.
And do you ever think about not taking custom orders? I mean, it
So
seems like you were just explaining, it seems like a lot of your business structure is um, built around return customers, um, and people buying, previous customers coming back and buying more work from you. Um, but I mean, I guess I'm coming from a place of where as soon as I could get out from doing custom orders, I wanted to. And I had a few return customers, but not many. But I think also part of that was um, probably the cost prohibit, like sometimes, or it's my work being somewhat cost prohibitive to
yeah.
be, for people to come back and buy multiple pieces. You know, some do, but most don't. Um, but yeah, do you ever see yourself in the future getting away from custom orders? Is that always, at least right now, does that feel like that's always going to be part of how you run your business?
Right now, I'd say it's part of the business. I mean, I wouldn't say the business is built around the return customer. It's just that
Yeah,
I couldn't justify to say no to an existing customer. You know, a guy who maybe already has 3 knife of yours, and he inquires and says, "Hey Ben, how are you? I'd like to buy another Giotto from you." Blah 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 blah. And
yeah,
then me going ahead and say, "Sorry, books are full." That's how it developed. I just
yeah,
can't have that. I can't say no in those circumstances, and
yeah,
that's how new customers don't get in. So yeah, I mean, you're right. My business is built around it, but not intentionally. I
sure,
guess it's and I mean, custom orders are a lot of work in the communication sense.
sure,
So I thought about compensating for that in some way. I mean, of course, money wise, because it's a lot more effort to make a custom knife, even if it's the exact same knife, to make it as a custom order than to for me to make it directly, because
sure,
the hours in email communication are in that knife as well, but I don't charge for it in that
right,
sense. So I thought about maybe at some point switching to a where the custom has a fee on it. I didn't ever do that so far. I don't know how I would implement it because I have a wait list that is so long that it would only come to fruition in about a year. So yeah, I don't know. I thought about it vaguely, but no concrete plan. So don't worry, guys. um,
um I'm curious too. So are you familiar with some of, like, have you seen the work by David and Luke over at Bloodroot Blades?
yeah,
Are you familiar? And so one of their models, or their model essentially, they do some customs. They kind of pick and choose what customs they do. But for the most part, their bread and butter is to do production work of whatever kind of like your kind of just build whatever kind of knife, and then but then they put it out in a newsletter but they don't do first come first serve. They do kind of a lottery
Lottery.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've always really admired and liked that model because it feels like the fairest way um, to offer to get the knives to somebody. And maybe somebody who's been sitting around, and I don't know if you've thought about the idea of maybe playing with that, not necessarily your whole 6 weeks or 8 weeks of work, but maybe just like a handful of like 5 knives or something like that goes to a group of potentially new customers that then maybe feed into the model structure that you have, even though it sounds like you have plenty of custom orders already. But feed into that model where it's potentially return customers coming in, because then you're kind of finding a way to introduce new customers to how your workflow normally goes.
Yeah,
Um,
I forgot that. I mean, in the batch of 20 knives, I have not only the retailer knives and the knives that are fun, which usually go to the retailer, but
yeah.
one or two of those land in my newsletter. So
Oh, okay.
that's yeah, and I essentially copied the model that they have going. At
Yeah.
first, I had first come first serve.
Yeah.
Um, but then I learned, and I didn't know that because I'm not an IT guy, that the newsletter doesn't arrive at the customer end at the same time for everyone. They are going
Staggered.
out one by one, essentially.
Yeah.
Fast, but not exactly.
Yeah.
And when I learned that, I made a random draw lottery since
Yeah.
then. And that works all right. And also, I have to say, I mean, guys who buy from Eating Tools, Crocker, Modern Cooking, or my Korean retailer, um, they, uh, I would, how do you say it? I take them as customers of mine as well.
Okay.
So if
So
they would order and say, "Hey, I bought a knife from you, but not from me directly, but one of mine," that's
right.
totally all right. They can,
Oh,
you know,
interesting. Do you do that for people? Maybe not that this happens, but if somebody were to buy a knife of yours on the forums from a different forum member, how does that also fall into that category a little bit too, or no?
it may have happened, but that's very depending on how
Sure.
my schedule at the time is, because secondhand is difficult, just due to the fact that some knives just change owners rather often throughout the years, and
Yeah.
I can't take custom orders in from everyone just because I'm booked out. It's
Right.
just, for me, it's hard to say no to a guy who paid, not only full value but even more
Mm,
at one of my retailers.
right.
I can't say no to those guys because they supported me so much already. Whereas when someone buys it secondhand, I feel less inclined, or
Yeah.
to see
Obligated.
that as
Yeah.
a supporter in that sense.
Yeah. I got you. That's fair.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's almost like they're if they understand that's how your business operates, it's almost like they're buying a ticket in a way to be
Yeah.
able to get into the system and jumping the line almost kind of in a way, in a weird way. I don't know. But that's cool that you treat your retail knives like custom orders as well.
Yeah, try to.
That's cool. And that you also you from the batches that you make, or from your whatever 6 months or 6 weeks build up from each batch, a couple go to potentially random kind of new customers. I
Yeah.
think that's smart. That's cool, because I know that the Bloodroot guys, they'll do 20 to 30 knives and they lottery every single knife, and all I can think is like on the back end, that's so much going through and drawing for every single knife and keeping track of all the people that signed up for that knife and this knife and the other knife. But to
Um,
do like a handful, like 2 or 3, I think sounds much more manageable than doing
yeah.
30 of them.
No, I mean, I thought about having an online shop at the beginning, and then again, I talked to friends like I did with my social media.
Sure.
How to market them at the beginning. So
Right.
friends told me get Instagram. That's the best way, and they were right, just by
Yeah.
coincidence, because they didn't know that there was a knife community on Instagram. But yeah, that
Yeah.
turned out exactly right. But then I talked to friends about how to approach selling knives I have just like in stock finished, and the most of my friends told me that the newsletter has some not only, I mean, it works for me because I don't put too many knives out there.
Yeah.
Let's say I would have 40 knives available a month. That would be just too much effort bureaucratically.
Right.
But since I have only one, probably every 2 months, that's all right, and it has a kind of a feeling of exclusivity.
Yeah.
It's nice to approach the customer via the newsletter instead of having an online shop where the customer has to come to you just at the right time. I mean, of course, you can have it parallel where you stock the online shop and then put out the newsletter. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was advice of my friends again, and it works out fine for me. So the draw isn't too much effort either. I get the emails in requesting the knife. I put a small answer in, and then I just mark them in my Gmail and put it in a different folder.
Right.
And then I count them,
Yeah.
mark them all. Let's say those are whatever number,
Yeah.
and then I put it in a random number generator. Then I count down, and that's it.
That's it.
I'm sending an email to the
Right.
guy.
And they all
It's
stay
not a
in
lot of effort.
chronological order.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. That's good. Very cool. These friends of yours, are they business owners themselves? And are they local to you, or are they friends like through the internet, or?
So the friends who told me to get Instagram are just friends, old friends. But the friends where I took the newsletter advice from are just knife nerds,
Okay.
local in Austria. We have frequent. We have meetings often.
Oh, you guys
Like
get together.
we see each
Oh,
other
cool.
2 times a year, about 2 to 3 times a
Oh,
year.
I like that. Yeah.
And I mean, those. I mean, last we've been together with Martin Huber and Tobias Hangler,
Yeah.
and we were, I think, 9 people or something, but had 70 high-end knives laying there. So
Wow.
it's really nice to get a hold of other makers' work as well,
Yeah.
to check it out, see it, test it, test cut it, and all that. So yeah.
That's great. I really like that, and I wish I did more of that. I mean, I travel around, and I did some traveling last year, and this coming year, I have a lot of traveling um, lined up. And I guess the idea is to connect with people and have those moments. But I don't know why, but I've never really tried to do that in Washington State, where I'm from. Either going up to Seattle or even going down to like Portland, and maybe it's a Pacific Northwest thing between Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Um, but yeah, I've never really done that, and I think it'd be fun to do these, because I know through the kitchen knife forums they call them um, gatherings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
possibly.
they call them
Yeah.
gatherings. Yeah, and but basically it's like a show and tell. Oh, I
Yeah.
did host one time. I did one at a friend's property. They have a beautiful property where they hold weddings and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and it was at a slow time of year where they didn't have any weddings lined up, and so they let us do our thing there, and
Nice.
they have tables and stuff set up, so we were able to like lay out knives. We had space, we had food. Shit, now I want to do that again, because I really enjoy that kind of community aspect of kind of like knife get-togethers, getting knife makers to come together, getting knife nerds to come together,
Yeah.
to hang out and talk knives, eat food, get a chance to touch and use and handle other knives is also another. Honestly, for for especially not only for users to get a sense of what they like and what they don't like, but honestly for makers, I think there are a lot of makers who could benefit a lot from using really quality, like really high end Japanese knives or other custom knives. And we just don't get our hands on a lot of knives. I was fortunate when I started out to get my hands on a lot of different custom knives, and or not a lot of different custom knives, but a lot of high end kind of Japanese production knives. And
Yeah.
that really informed the way that I designed my grinds and do my grinds and my knives, as well as getting feedback from customers as well.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
not only using them, but also talking to the guy who owns it and talking to him what he appreciates about it. I mean,
right.
because when you use something that works really well, you might even not notice some details. I
Sure.
know I've myself, I mean, I've talked about that a lot, but it's just such a prominent uh, failure on my side that I didn't round the spine and the jaw very good at the beginning, and
Oh, sure.
I didn't even see a problem in that
Right.
until people told me that it is, and things like that. Talking to people, I mean, with the knife nerds I'm meeting frequently, we discuss grinds, we discuss finishes, we discuss
Right.
balance points. I don't know. Even I pass new ideas by them and ask them what they think about it, and
Right.
can we oftentimes improve them together with other knife makers. But
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, we met or we knew each other from the German forum, and within the German forum, we all knew who is Austrian and who is German. And since Austria is such a small country, it really would be the equivalent of you having a forum just probably in Washington State or
Right.
something like that,
Yeah.
or in the Seattle area. So I think it's more difficult for you to find someone local than for me at the time, because I mean, German is only spoken in Swiss, Austria, and Germany, anyways.
Yeah.
And for me to meet the guys is at most a 2 hours drive, not more. So
Sure.
I wouldn't go through the effort of driving 13 hours. I just wanted to say that. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no. So
No, that's a good
I
point.
think that's a coincidence in a way that works so well for me,
Yeah.
just due to location, or
Right.
and the German forum.
Yeah, and honestly, Seattle would probably be the best place to try to do something, and there are definitely people up there that I could coordinate with to put together a gathering. Um, but even still, like if somebody was driving all the way from Eastern Washington, they would be driving, God, they'd probably be driving almost 4 hours
Oh yeah.
to get just to Seattle. From like Spokane to Seattle, I think is like 4 hours, 3.5, 4 hours. Yeah, long drive. But
Yeah.
if we planned it ahead, we could make it happen. But I think that's a really great benefit of the forums as well as these online communities through the knife maker communities. People are excited to see each other and to share their work, and I think that's a really good point that you bring up, is that the opportunity for somebody to not only get their hands on and try a new knife, but talk to the person that owns it, so they can learn more about the nuances and things that they might not necessarily pick up initially when you're first using the knife. Um, and again, if they're customers of you, they are also massive advocates, and and they're going around and shouting from the rooftops, "We love
Hap-
Ben Camon's knives."
Happens to be all of them are customers, but to be honest, I don't enjoy that fact. I'd much rather
Sure.
have my friends not be customers of mine at the same time. It's it's yeah, no, I don't know the exact word. It's kind of awkward to, yeah,
Sure.
it's a difficult relationship for me.
Well, and I can imagine having an event where everybody are owners of your knives is like some weird self-aggrandizing celebration of Ben Camon knives.
We made a group pictures the last meetup, and yeah, I think it was above more than 10 knives of mine that were laying there, and
Oh
that
yeah,
was kind of I mean, I was thankful, but you know, it's just, yeah, kind of a lot of pressure at the same time.
sure.
It's
Yeah,
not, yeah.
well, I mean, and I can imagine they're probably not all from this, from the most recent work. They're probably from all over the past 5 years or 6 years of knife making. And I know I have a friend. He just posted on Instagram. You might know him from the kitchen knife forums. He's Mark 4.0.
Yep.
And so he yeah, he posted my knife and like wishing people Merry Christmas. It was just a picture of my knife, and it was I was like, oh my god, that knife is so old. Like first thing I want to do, I'm like, I messaged him actually. I'm like, dude, you gotta send me that knife so I can update the grind and refinish it and make it pretty looking again and stuff. because it's just I feel like I mean, every time I make a knife, I'm making small adjustments and getting better and better still after all these years,
Yeah.
on every piece. And I struggle when I see older work, and I'm just like, oh god, because I know I wasn't grinding the same, especially as thin as as I am now.
Yeah.
And I know that the blade geometry is not as high performance as they are now. Um, my knives cut very different now than what when I first started making them 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you, one of the guys I'm meeting frequently, has the first knife I ever sold. So I'm
Oh,
getting the kick in the nuts every time I see him. I mean, he's happy with it and he knows what's up. He knows
yeah,
that it's just, the first knife I ever sold. And he's happy
yeah,
with it in that context. He treats it like a collector's item almost. I mean, they
sure,
use it, of course. He
yeah,
gifted it his wife, but he knows that it's by far not as perfect in regards of fit and finish and all that than my more recent work. So, but for me, as you said, it's always a kick in the nuts every time I see it. It's ooh.
yeah.
It's not comfortable.
I just realized it's more like a fan club that's getting together. It's the Kamon Knives fan club.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
hopefully
funny.
not.
Yeah, no, I mean, they are technically kind of, but at the same time, yeah, I'm sure they have plenty of other knives, and you guys talk
Yeah,
about other stuff, which is good.
they have a
Um,
lot of knives.
yeah, that's good. Um, you, what was? Oh God, I had something. I can't remember. Um, for some reason, what's coming in my head right now, curious to ask you about is your evolution as a knife maker. I don't know if you started out with stock removal or if you did forging or if you did a little bit of both. But I remember at one point, like it seemed like on social media you had to like defend yourself at one point. It seemed like somebody was maybe saying that you didn't actually forge your knives and
Ah,
so then you started going through and showing a lot more of your actual process. And it's like, no, he's definitely forging his knives. Like I don't
yeah.
so what was that like for you? And what was that all about?
I mean, that happened a few times.
Yeah.
I know it happened one time on Instagram, but one or more times on the German forum actually.
Oh,
It's just people who don't actually know a thing of forging. The one guy was I know pretty exactly from German forums. The one guy was essentially saying that the denty texture, the texture, those small craters
yeah.
uh, in the um, upper 2/3 of my knives
Yeah.
are just, yeah, exactly, are just how did he put it, like not really forged, just cold pressed in or just visual things.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I had to educate him on those regards, because it is forged in every sense, meaning that I have to give the blade blank a different shape before I put that texture in,
Yeah.
because it spreads the material by so much.
Sure.
It's forged in hot, first of
Yeah.
all, and it spreads the material by so much that that the blade blank has to be curved upwards,
Yeah.
the tip upwards before I put it in. So the spine spreads and then
Yeah.
the tip moves down again.
Right.
And I mean, I explained it a lot. My thinking behind it is not. I mean, it's a nice visual effect, but the main thing behind it is it should improve food release.
Right.
So it builds air pockets into the blade, and it should prevent the food from sticking up to the spine and then falling maybe over the spine or just rolling throughout the kitchen.
Right.
And that's one thing it does. But also, and that's harder for laypersons to wrap their mind around, it reduces weight. So many people I
Oh, yeah.
talked to thought I'm compressing steel or something like that. That's not what's happening. But due
Like
to,
the mass was staying the same.
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
what you're saying, but
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
if if you think about it, a layperson thinks of something like wood. If
Oh,
you
yeah,
would
sure.
hammer a piece of wood, then it would compress itself, right?
Right.
So some people don't, but I explained that, and what turned out to be really hard for people to conceptualize is that the blade gets lighter by spreading the material. So the way you can think about it, if I would start with the same size blade blank, and forge it out, and one time have just a plain forged surface area, and then in comparison a denti surface area, then the blade blank with the denti would just be bigger in height and bigger in length.
Yeah.
And then I would grind it off to get the same size knife out of it. And then, of course, the denti would be lighter. Or what I'm actually doing is I'd start with a smaller blade blank, of course, to save
Right.
material. Because why would I, if I'm forging 2 times
Yeah.
a 250 Giotto, why would I start the denti with more material, right?
Right.
But that was a hard thing for people to conceptualize. But that's essentially what it does. So it enhances food release and it makes the blade lighter in weight. The downside it has is possibly that it makes the blade more flexible. I mean, we're talking nuances, but
Sure.
some guys really like their blades to be super stiff, and
Right.
if they tell me that they want that to happen, then I'd not recommend any S grinds or texture like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was being attacked. I mean, you know the internet. I think you got it too at times. I'm sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Um,
I get it. People are
Attacked for a
bored.
lot of things, and I mean, and then again, friends of mine always say, "Don't justify yourself. Those are stupid people." But then again, I think um, I don't like to think of them as trolls, but I think most of them really don't understand.
Yeah.
I think there is something to be said to put the knowledge at least out there. If
Yeah.
they still decide to troll you and annoy you, then okay, then leave them be. But I think some people, also the reader who is not participating in the discussion, can learn something from it. So
That was
yeah,
what I was thinking about is again, to defend and justify, or not justify, but support your choice to do that. It's very easy to get defensive and lash back out at whoever might be throwing perceived insults and stuff like that. But the opportunity, taking the time to educate somebody, is not just to educate that one person, but like you were saying, anybody else that might also be reading that,
yeah,
and giving them, even though they're not the ones voicing an opinion, you're still creating an opportunity to educate them as well. And that might be hundreds of people who are seeing a particular conversation, and then giving them the information and understanding for them to then make their own decision about what that previous person is saying. Because most often people are, unless yeah, most often people are conducting themselves from a place of a lack of understanding or knowledge and
yeah.
information, and they're really, for whatever reason, they feel like they need to lash out and say something about something they don't actually really understand, so that they can maybe be perceived as knowledgeable.
And
And
there is a
really,
cascade effect also in a sense,
yeah,
because I mean the guy that lashes out is only the one guy that is very unfriendly, but uneducated and unfriendly, the combination of
yeah,
the two. But there is a high chance there are more guys out there who are just not as rude as to confront you about their lack of knowledge,
yeah,
but who read that and think, if you don't respond positively as a maker to that and educate the guys on those things, who just feel themselves confirmed
yeah,
by the rude guy saying some other bullshit,
yeah,
and then just go away out of the conversation and thinking, yeah, Kamon really doesn't forge. I knew it, you know.
yeah,
So I'm always making the effort to respond to those guys and try to kill them with kindness.
yeah. Nice. I love it. I want to get into your construction, because we've talked a little bit about the various styles of knives that you make, and I think for me particularly, when I first saw your knives, I really liked that brute de forge. I've always been attracted to and drawn to kind of a brute de forge aesthetic, or kind of that, I think in Japanese it's kurochi,
Yeah.
finish, which is kind of essentially a brute to forge, but kind of
Yeah.
finish on a blade. And so, but then also seeing your blend of um, machine work with in your handle work, especially when it comes to the bolster and the butt cap of your handles, I think is a really great, I guess, aesthetic quality. And I know it definitely serves a function, but aesthetically, it's very nice. And I think you've done a really good job of striking that balance, because I think it's very easy to combine what look like basically a lot more kind of mechanical elements with natural elements like wooden handle material, and you've done a good job making it look right and looking good. And I think part of that, and I think, let's see, I have an example here. Like, you still, this is a butt cap, and I think this is probably copper or bronze.
Bronze.
Yeah. And you have this very kind of mechanical look. I mean, if I wasn't seeing the rest of the handle, I could almost say that looks like the face of like a robotic creature or something like that. But then you have
Nice.
these scratches along in the facets and the chamfers that help give it kind of an unpolished and kind of more rustic kind of look that blends nicely into the more natural materials. And I think that's what sometimes is, it can still look good, but also doesn't pair well, is really highly refined and polished pieces with more natural toned and natural quality handle materials. And I think what you do a really good job of is mixing kind of that kind of aged and roughed and textured kind of look. And as well as, I have one in here that I believe is wrought iron. I'm not sure which one it is, where it is. Maybe this one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's raw down. Yeah.
um and it just like it flows beautifully. I think it flows beautifully into the handle when it has that refinement, but it's also rough. It has those rough edges at the same
A lot
time.
of contrast.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm really into like the textural quality of the handle, or the elements of your pieces. And I'm curious, if you will take a moment to kind of share about the development of that process, or that aesthetic, I guess, more than anything. If it was just, when you first started making knives, is that's what made sense, or if it was an evolution that got you to where we're there now.
Yeah, it's a good question, but it takes some time to explain.
Sure.
So at the beginning, back when I was at the blacksmith shop,
Yeah.
um, we had a very limited supply of materials. I mean, I only had could have or could work with materials that were around or were laying around. So that was essentially mild steel, some burning wood, oak, beech, something like that,
Sure.
and steels we had laying in the shop. And yeah, early on I discovered the with the handles, I discovered the problem I think every knife maker at some point in his journey discovers. You can't really drill a rectangular hole. So you're drilling a round hole,
Yeah.
then sticking the tang into that, and then you have two half round spaces left and right of the handle open.
Yeah.
So of course I had to close that up like everyone does. And you can then either use a double construction, and I don't know, don't want to bore you with all the other constructions out there that
That's
are
what we're here
possible.
with. That's what we're here for. You just feel free to talk.
No, but I decided to just cap it up with a metal piece because I
Okay.
was a metal worker anyways, and that was what was making sense to me, or most sense to me.
Yeah.
So I had a round hole in the handle, and I have it to this day. The round hole in the handle is sufficient to bear the lateral forces of the knife having the board impact, for example, rock chopping or
Sure.
chopping. Um, but without the metal cap, the handle could rotate or around the tang essentially. So
Okay.
the metal front end cap prevents that. It's just
It keeps the
holding
handle
left and
fixed.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just holding left and right on the tang, and prevents the handle from rotating on the tang.
I got you.
Um, so and then I thought about how to fix it to the handle. And since I mean, it was just a very straightforward decision to say I'll screw it onto there, because I was having to take it down later on because
Right.
mild steel would rust. I
Yeah.
wanted to black burn it, so I had to mount the mild steel onto the handle wood, finish up the handle, so grind it to shape, finish it up through the grids,
Yeah.
and then black burn it. And I, of course, can only do that without the wood, because the would burn.
Yeah.
Wood. um, so I just decided to use the screws. Parallel to that, I mean, a big inspiration also was an Austrian knife maker called Korad. He doesn't make kitchen knives anymore, but he did at that time. Back then, he still makes great straight razors. He's
Mm.
an awesome guy. Great inspiration also. But he made a takedown handle, so that was kind of at the same time where I saw that and thought, man, that's a nice thing. I might go in that direction also. I mean, it then ended up being quite a different thing, but he definitely played a role in that handle design overall.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that explains the little screws. They have essentially no benefit for the customer. Early on, that was, I have to say, that was back when that came up. That was back when I didn't even sell knives. We just were
Mm.
making them and having made the first knives ever, getting into it and all that, back in the
Yeah.
old shop. And yeah, I just thought, man, those screws are kind of cool.
They
And
are.
I just let them be. I later on, due to some criticism, um implemented an option for hidden pins, which I also do. That makes
Mm.
for
Okay.
just closed handles essentially.
Like
and
this.
and yeah, yes, yeah, like that
Yeah.
exactly. But you can order them as also with just the metal end caps.
I got you.
um yeah, just imagine the holes not being there, and that would be the hidden pin construction. But
Sure.
at first, I just had the screws and decided for those. And the takedown handle, yeah, I think it evolved parallel to that. I always was a fan of having the um, production date, the steel grade, and things about the treatment and all that, having it on the knife itself.
Right.
Um, I can't even tell you where exactly that comes from. I mean, I'm very much a fan of having a maker's mark on your knife. Also, I know some guys don't don't put a lot of value onto that, but
Sure.
I always think it's a big mistake when I find old tools and I'm curious who made them and there is no maker's mark on it. I hate that. And I think just
Yeah.
generations down, when someone in 100 years gets a hold of one of my knives, I think it's cool to have the production date engraved in the tang and have the steel grade engraved in the tang. And yeah, that's, I mean, it's a benefit for guys who thin their knives on Japanese stones as well. They can take the handle down, not
Right.
worry about any water stains on the handle wood or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it has a lot of benefits, and I don't have to work with glue. That's also a benefit.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just trying to realizing that I don't think I understood the handle construction before. So the cap on the front is affixed to the handle,
Yeah,
but it's the bolt at the back that attaches the tang or the handle to the knife.
exactly.
And so, but the other screws around the outside again are to help maintain orientation of the handle so it doesn't spin
Yeah,
around.
yeah. You can
Oh,
think about them as
I like
visual guiding pins,
yeah,
not hidden pins, but visual.
yeah,
They are doing the same job. They are not even, they don't even have to put pressure on the handle. I mean, of course, in my case they do,
sure,
because I grind the handle without the knife, and then the end caps have to hold onto the handle material. With the hidden pin construction, I actually have to put a threaded rod through the whole handle, hold it together to
yeah,
grind the handle. So that's a benefit for that. But once the end nut is fixed and the handle sits on the tang,
yeah,
those little screws don't even have to put pressure onto the end caps, because the
Right.
whole thing gets pressed together anyways. So they are just guiding the alignment,
Right.
essentially.
Are there ever I mean, I'm just noticing, I think that one I just what is it? So I think you mentioned before that you heat the tang up and then quench it in oil
Yeah,
to
water.
help, or into water to keep
Yeah.
it, to help make it more rust resistant, right?
No, the tang I
Okay.
just heat up just to make it as ductile and less hard as possible. I mean,
Okay.
when I'm quenching, I'm not quenching the tang itself. The oil goes
Sure.
right into the choil, and the blade is tilted forward. So
Okay.
I don't know, just the colorized tang part and a little more
Yeah.
is not hardened actually. But I
Okay.
mean, the steels I'm using will still air harden to an extent, but they are not as hard from the get go. And then I
Okay.
try with the tempering colors. I just try to make make it as I mean, it's a high temper. You can think of it as a high temper. I'm reducing hardness,
Yeah.
increasing toughness, not ductility. I used the wrong term, toughness.
Okay.
And I'm trying to make the tang as tough as possible. It doesn't need
Yeah.
to be super hard, nor does I want it to
No.
be brittle.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's good.
And the
And
colors, just I just l- um let them on most of the time. It's
yeah,
just a nice little detail, I
it's
think. But
great. No,
sometimes
I
I take
love it.
them off.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I Are there, and this is kind of another look at some of that toughness being put back into the blade. Are there ever issues with moisture getting into the handles if you're not working with glue, as kind of basically as a sealant to help keep stuff out?
On the front end cap, I'm using a little bit of some like permanent glue, but it
Okay.
doesn't hold up, but it just seals up that gap,
Okay. Yeah.
and I wipe it away. But it doesn't fix anything. It's just like a seal I apply. But
Yeah.
when the customer takes it down, I've used for for customers who order two handles, I've used Vaseline, the white
Oh yeah.
paraffin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just in a very tiny gap. There won't be any problem with moisture.
Right.
I haven't had gut reports, nor do I have any
That's
problems with my own knives. But
yeah. Yeah. No, that's great.
I do seal it up, because I think I didn't even try to never do that actually. But I would think that water would crawl into there if there wasn't some
Sure.
kind of mm, sealing, or yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so cool. I feel like it's a really great handle construction. I really like that a lot. And I think actually, I'm trying to think. When I first saw your work, I saw one, at least early on when I first discovered you, that one of the knives that you had built had multiple handles, and I'm like, oh man, because it's an idea I'd had. I'm like, if there was a way to standardize the tang, how cool would it be to just be able to machine handles to a to certain specifications, so that you can just have a handle of the day. But I don't know if all your tangs are standardized, or if everyone's unique, and so each handle has to be made for a specific blade. They're not necessarily interchangeable with other blades.
Yeah, good question. In my case, the handle is always fit to the blade.
Okay.
I thought about early on. I thought about having them interchangeable throughout the lineup. Let's say.
Sure.
Um, for one, it's very difficult to machine, because not only do you have to machine the handle to certain dimensions, but also the tang always has to have the same size.
Right.
So for me, it was difficult to machine in the sense that I don't have a mill. I only have a drill press. But that's all things. I mean, you could get that. Then
Right.
I thought about the difficulty of fixing a blade that is forged. I don't ever have a flat reference point
Sure.
anywhere on my knives. So that would be, even if I had a mill, that would turn out to be a problem. I mean, all problems are there to be solved. I'm sure there is a solution, but I'm just
Right.
saying there are a lot of difficulties. And then the last thing that really tipped me over the edge, where I said, okay, I'll leave that be and don't mind it,
Yeah.
was my knives have very different sizes throughout the lineup. So, for example, a Tsuchihiki would have a handle that is 135 to 140 millimeters long,
Yeah.
whereas a Chinese cleaver would have a thicker handle that's only 110 millimeters long.
Okay.
So that's a variation of 4 to 6 inches, round about that. And then a patty would have also the same length, but be way narrower, or not as wide,
Yeah.
or not as much circumference.
I see.
Um, and the Kyoto is exactly in the middle of that. So my thinking was, okay, if I go through the effort and then the customer who has a complete lineup of my knives can't change them anyways, just because
Right.
of the handle, the blade shapes,
Right.
then what sense does it make? And the handles I'm making are rather expensive compared to other knife makers that sell handles, um, as on their own,
Yeah.
anyways, due to the construction and all that.
Yeah.
So there aren't a lot of customers buying two handles, anyways,
Sure.
and that wasn't ever the first goal of them. I mean, it's cool to have if you,
Yeah, for sure.
if yeah, but it's it's yeah, they're expensive.
Yeah. Mike has a question while we're talking about handles. Mike Poor of Red Dragon Forge. He says, "Is the central bolt on the butt cap a nut or a bolt that goes to the bolster? You
Yeah.
mentioned all thread for some of the knives. So is it a bolt that goes all the way up into the bolster, or is it a nut that attaches to thread that's on the attached to the tang, or
Yeah, good question. It's actually a
I'm
nut.
not
I'm
sure.
always saying bolt because it's so
Sure.
confusing. I learned it's confusing for people when I say it's a nut, because they are used to for a nut to be hexagonal and be on the outside of things. Most people see that and don't think
Right.
it's a nut. So I'm always saying it's a screw, but it's actually a nut, and the thread is soldered into a slot in the tang.
Right.
So when I'm forging the knives, I'm grinding out the tang, making the handle fit up,
Yeah.
and then I drill a 4 millimeter diameter hole uh, into the tang at the right at the end. And after and that's where I hold my knives for heat treatment. So there is
Okay.
a little pin. I have a special tongue. There's a little pin that goes into that hole. So after
Okay.
heat treatment, I cut the slot open, and the 4 millimeter hole then becomes kind of the end of that slot, and that's where I put the thread in, and then hard solder
Oh, I got you.
the threaded rod in. Yeah.
Yeah. That's smart. I like that. That makes sense. Yeah.
Thanks.
When I was doing more of my bedded tang and through tang construction. So what I would do, I would essentially do the same thing. I would attach threaded rod to the tang of the blade, and then I would use a Corby bolt from the back end. And then when I would sculpt the handle, because it would just be that would be a final glue up. It's not meant to be taken back apart again.
Yeah.
But it was a way to capture the handle material from the bolster and from and the back of the handle. And I really like it, and I know a lot of people are doing it. I was first inspired to do it by my friend Jeremy Spake, and I know guys like Will Stelter and Nick Anderson, I think, does it, and Salem Straub does it, and Charlie Ellis does it nowadays. There are a lot of great makers doing it, and more than anything, it's kind of like an added level. It feels to me like an added level of security, but because I'm making culinary knives that aren't meant for hard use, I'm not too worried about the handle coming off the tang. But I do think it definitely still has a place, especially if anybody's doing kind of if they're ever doing a bedded tang. I think it's important to be able to capture it from the end as well if you're
Yeah.
going to do a bedded tang, because that is going to help secure the handle to the blade much better than just simply gluing it back on. Especially if they're doing like the wax approach to doing a bedded tang, because the wax basically acts as a uh, I don't know what the word is, but it doesn't want, it doesn't help the epoxy in the final glue up. If you're using glue, it prevents the epoxy from
To
fully
stick.
hardening. And so you
Okay,
have
yeah.
to do some work to kind of clean out some of that wax and to kind of rough up the inside of the tang area, and and then also by capturing it again from the back end is a really good way to create a more solid construction. So yeah,
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you tie it tie the tie the handle down to the knife itself during glue up, it's not only a mechanical fixture in addition to the glue. I think it's
yeah,
also a perfect way to clamp it down. I mean,
yeah,
if the process
it's
is
awesome.
easier, I don't see a problem in that.
Sure.
It's a little more effort, I'm sure. But if one is comfortable with it, making it, I don't see any downsides to that other than being more labor intensive, probably.
Yeah, and honestly, at first when I first started it, it was a little bit more labor intensive, but as I was doing it for probably at least a couple of years before I stopped doing it. Um, uh, I don't know where I was going with that. But anyways, oh yeah, as I was doing it for a couple of years, I it became much more easier just with repetition, and then I
Uh,
could get the handle, and all the right holes and everything drilled, and everything the thread onto the tang and everything easily within like half a day of work, a couple hours of work to get that all put together. As long as I had everything organized in my head. And so keeping notes is a good move as well, just so you can have your order of operations down, so you don't really have to stop and think about what's supposed to come next. You just can kind of jump straight to the next thing. But to answer your question though, Mike, I do think that if for a larger, if somebody has a larger bolster kind of area, like an integral bolster, that a long threaded bolt could do the same kind of job. It's just a matter of, I guess, figuring out the length of bolt that you would need, honestly, and then having somewhere at the back of the handle for that bolt head to seat, so that it is pulling the handle on. Because you don't necessarily want it sticking out the back of the handle. I think
uh,
always either flush or slightly recessed is best, just aesthetically looking. But if it's sticking way out the back, that's going to look kind of funny. Like if it's the whole head, it's going to look funny. But I think, yeah. So some thought into how to do that would help. But otherwise, yeah, I think using a threaded bolt actually could totally do the same approach, especially for larger bolster knives. I think for yours, you're limited on, if you were to try to do that, you'd be very limited on the size of bolt that you could use, because it looks like the thickest part of your blade is maybe at that ricasso area is maybe 5 millimeters, 4.5 millimeters or so.
yeah, six
Six.
millimeters, but
Okay.
still, I mean, if you were to th- um, drill a hole in there and put a thread in there,
Yeah.
it would be 4 millimeters metric at max. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, that wouldn't really work out with my construction. But as you said, for an integral bolster, I've seen guys do that with 8 millimeter to 10 millimeter
Yeah.
bolts, and
Yeah.
they're sufficient in the to take up that lateral force as well,
For
to
sure.
not bend. Um,
Yeah.
4 millimeters wouldn't be, I
No,
feel.
that would not be ideal. Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking now, like if somebody wanted a larger bolt, they could maybe do like a 3/8 or a half-inch bolt into the bottom of the integral bolster, and then have a smaller bolt and then drill and tap
Yeah.
the bottom of the big bolt, so that a smaller bolt could go and attach the handle to the
I
larger
think I've
bolt.
seen someone do that.
Oh,
I'm not
really?
entirely sure, but I think, because while you were talking, I was thinking, I think someone did that, but I
Yeah,
couldn't remember it,
sure.
who it was.
Yeah, I think more and more, the more I think about the idea of using bolts, as tangs that thread into an integral bolster. I think the more I think about it, the more I think it's definitely a viable process. It's just you just got to have things figured out. So, like you were saying, the reason you have the screws on either side of the front cap and the butt cap is to keep the handle from spinning. If you just have a straight hole drilled in there and it's just bolted down and glued up, I don't think that's going to be enough to keep the handle potentially from changing its spinning its orientation. So figuring out also how to attach things within that handle, whether it's secondary pins or hidden pins or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
to help keep things oriented the right way. um, but again, that adds more work. But if you're doing all that kind of stuff before it's even hardened, that should be not it should be
Yeah,
pretty
you can only
straightforward.
do that before it's hardened. I mean,
Yeah.
if you were to put a thread in,
Yeah.
I don't know that you can cut a thread into
No,
hardened
I
steel.
mean you'd have to heat the bolster up too hot, and that
Uh,
heat bleeding into the blade would probably not be the best thing
uh,
for sure. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, that's a cool idea. Um, I'm sorry, I'm just looking back through your knives. Um, I keep so the grinds. You have all these wild grinds that you've been playing with lately, where you're combining like an S grind. Maybe it's a hollow grind on one side, but then you have what I think you're calling a J grind. Is that
no, I mean that's what I call the S hook.
S hook?
But the old S hook was dominant hand specific, so
Okay.
it was asymmetrical.
Okay.
Um, it was it was a hook grind on one side and then S grind on the other side. So
Yeah.
like that picture you're seeing now on one side and the
Yeah.
other side essentially looked almost like that. Um,
Yeah. I think
yeah,
there you go. Like
I've
this.
always experimented with the grinds. I
Yeah.
think that also comes from the forum days because
Okay.
the guys there, the knife nerds, always were very experimental. And
Sure.
also, I mean, in the forums there always were hobby makers within the forums, and those guys always were innovators in a sense because
Sure.
they just made it for fun and they had the time to experiment since it was only a hobby. And I always perceived them as innovators in a sense. And I mean, in the German forum, you have to imagine there is one guy, I've never seen anything like that. He masks the hardened and roughly ground to shape blade with some paint or lacquer or whatever,
Okay.
and leaves out the part that we would hollow grind, right? And
Okay.
then he puts it in the ferric acid and etches the hollow grind out.
Oh,
For example,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of those things where I'm thinking, wow, super innovative and experimental and yeah, kind of cool.
That is kind of cool. Yeah, I think, I mean, it seems to make sense. And I could see, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I could see how somebody could also use maybe a fiber laser or something like that to do a very similar thing.
Tobias Hangler actually did that and experimented with that already.
Right.
He showed me a prototype. I mean, there are some problems.
Sure.
For one, heat is an issue at that point.
Yeah, I bet.
um, because the fiber laser usually doesn't induce too much heat, but if you're lasering big surface areas on small or thin material,
Yeah.
then of course it adds up. And also you don't have to forget, and that was an interesting thing he learned. um, the blade warped slightly. I think he
Oh,
only
interesting.
yeah, he only experimented with it asymmetrically, so on one side. But
Hmm.
he, at the time, was saying, I think that maybe if it's symmetrical, it will even out. But yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, no, well, it's interesting because if you're going to do that with a fiber laser, you can't just do necessarily one pass on one side and then flip it over, do a one pass and then do a secondary pass and keep flipping it
Yeah,
back and forth. You have to do everything on one side.
yeah,
If you're going to do it bilaterally, then you flip it over and do everything on the other side. And if there is, if any warping has been induced, that's also going to affect the depth that the laser's cutting at too. Yeah.
probably. I mean, yeah, it's difficult, but it's
Yeah, it's
it's it's
interesting.
interesting to think about. I mean, the
Yeah.
laser really um, vaporizes the steel. The
Sure.
hardened steel vaporizes, and at a big surface area, I found that to be an amazing thing with
Yeah.
those relatively cheap fiber lasers at that
Yeah.
point. They're not too expensive.
Yeah. No, it's I don't that literally has never crossed my mind until just now when we were talking about it, that somebody could do that. But yeah, the heat induced would be a concern. And so yeah, if there's a way to set up the ventilation system, maybe so that it's drawing a large volume of air across the blade to help keep it cool while it's laser.
Yeah,
But
or lay it on a wet towel or something. I think that could
mm,
do it also. I think Black Dragon Forge.
yeah,
The
Niels Vandenberg.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think he does a lot with the engraving with the fiber
Right.
laser. His
Yeah.
engraving, his deep engraving is, I think, is it's lasered. I'm not entirely sure, but just looking at it, I think that could be what he does. And I
Yeah.
think it's pretty cool what you can do with those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think he's doing that. Yeah, I think he's using the fiber laser a lot. And but then he's also using it for inlay work. And I think I've seen other makers starting to use lasers for inlay work as well to cut at least the initial channel. Obviously, when it's cutting the channel, it's straight down, but for inlay work, you have to actually cut in also
Hmm.
to the sidewall so that when you inlay whatever wire, that you can kind of grasp that
Yeah,
wire once it's hammered in. Um, and so that's cool it's been cool to see how he's experimenting and playing with some of those for sure.
yeah.
Um, Mike has another comment. I think he says you could set up the laser with a rotary vise, so do 10 passes on one side and flip, etc.
Ah.
I don't even know what a rotary vise is.
Oh yeah, I mean I know it from wedding rings. They laser engrave the inside with whatever, the
Hmm.
date, and
Yeah.
and they have a vice for those because of the round surface of the
Oh,
inside of
okay.
the wedding ring. It
Yeah.
has to be rotated to look good, because
Yeah.
otherwise some of the engraving would not be sharp, I guess, or not be.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, that makes sense.
Interesting.
The laser then knows where the thing is. Yeah, that could work. Good
Yeah.
idea.
I guess. Yeah. Or if there's a way to, also seen, like, what is it when people do handle wraps? Sometimes they clamp the blade into basically a fixture that flips across a fixed
Yeah,
axis or a pivot or hinge. And
yeah,
so if the laser's set up to know where and it's
yeah.
accurate enough to be basically exactly in the same position, you could just flip it back and forth, then that might also be a way to work evenly back and forth.
I mean, the laser's accurate. The question is if you're accurate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That would be the big. If the fixture can be
Yeah,
designed to be as accurate as possible. Yeah, cool.
totally.
Very cool stuff. Um, let's see. I'm going to go back to some of your pictures you got here. So you experiment with a lot of um, different materials. I know after you talked with Jeff, I think maybe the first time about the possibility of doing some collaboration work with Joshua Prince. Prince Works Forge. It looks like he got some steel to you,
Yeah.
and you guys did a collaboration. I don't have the picture of that particular piece, but what was that like for you doing that kind of collaboration work, kind of maybe for the first time? I
Um,
don't know if it was the first one for you or not, but
no, the first. I mean, at the time, I think it was the first one with Joshua.
yeah,
But generally, collaborations always are kind of nerve wracking and
sure,
and a lot of effort. I mean, and not to the fault of either of us
sure,
participating in it, but just communication, setting it up, then sending
yeah,
materials around, um, and then maybe to have to deal with a mishap of any kind. I
right,
mean, it's just not only is it um, a lot of effort that went into, let's say, a piece of Damascus at that point,
yeah,
but also a guy like me, for example, isn't used to working with Damascus a lot.
right,
So the chance of a mishap happening, um, working with a material you don't know as good, is quite high. So yeah, it's always a nerve wracking, but yeah, it's always very satisfying to see the result when it works out as well.
Sure.
And I mean, working with Joshua is always nice. He's just a super talented guy. And the first, I think it was the first collab we did. It was a monolith knife I forged, and I experimented with the edging a little. It was I think the pattern was called Lion's Fist.
Okay.
So he had in the back of the blade, he had one of his block welts. Um,
Oh,
of
yeah.
if his round inlays, so to say.
Yeah.
Um, and I deep edged it and then over polished it. So what was showing wasn't really the contrast in the different steels of the Damascus due to edging, but it was relief edged, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. So
Yeah.
it was just a height difference you were seeing due to
Mm,
the shadow that cast on the blade face.
right.
Yeah, but it was looking really cool. I mean, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know if you can look it up on eating tools, but never mind. It was a pretty nice piece. I was happy how it turned out
Yeah. Yeah. If
looking.
people want to see pictures of it, they can go onto your Instagram, right? It's Kamon Knives. Is there an
Kamon underscore knives. Yeah.
underscore knives? And they can see it on your page there. But you've done other collaborations since. I think you did the Florentine knives, and I don't know if that was before or after Josh. You've done you did some sort of like limited series run where you had the bolsters and the butt caps like engraved in a special way, and the handles were red.
Yeah, that was with Dark Siegel Workshop, Philipp Mann.
Okay.
He's the engraver. That was the first piece we made together.
Okay.
We since then made another piece together that was pretty badass with the Schnitter with the death, death
Oh
himself
yeah.
engraved
Yeah, I actually
into
have
the
the
handle.
handle.
Yeah, that was him also. That
Yeah.
I mean, that guy is talented,
Right.
crazy talented. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to imagine. I only gave him the outlines of that handle.
Right.
It's moose ivory, so that's the base of the moose antler.
Oh
That
wow.
isn't hollow, so it really looks and touches like ivory, pretty
Yeah.
much. But it's uh, sustainable, or how do you say it? It's karma free in a sense because they shed their
Yeah, every
antlers.
year. Yeah, they
Yeah,
drop the
exactly.
antlers
It's
every
not
year.
like real ivory in that sense. And we had two collaborations already. The piece you were talking about, where the end caps were engraved by him,
Yeah.
and then that piece with a French comic artist. I had a collaboration that was pretty cool because he um, put one of my knives, the design, into the comic, and his
Yeah.
comics are just, I mean, not like Marvel or DC comics, but very rustic. They are black and white,
Right.
and they are about giants. So
Oh,
he has such a talent in illustrating the scale. So they are kind of can do you know the game God of War? So the scale,
I'm vaguely aware of it. Yeah.
yeah, being very small and with such huge giants in the same picture with the
Hmm.
buildings, and then one of the giants was having one of my knives, and um, he made a
Was it a
drawing.
giant size knife or was it normal human
My
size knife?
knife wasn't, sadly, but in the comic it would be bigger than me.
Yeah. Okay.
So he hand drew a drawing or painting. I don't know how to put it, but it was
Sure.
genuine artwork.
Yeah.
Um, and we put it together with four of his comics and the knife that was fitting to the drawing he made.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a super cool collaboration because the knife handle had the theme of the comics, so it was black on the handle, bog oak, and black burnt mild steel, and
Yeah.
then bronze spacers because his comics, the only color he has is gold. So it's
Oh,
black, white, and gold. It looks so, yeah, it looks pretty awesome. I like
I
that a
actually
lot.
I got to see that piece in person.
Yeah, I
I've
know where you did.
yeah, I've been fortunate to see the only pieces I've seen of yours were alongside that comic book piece. I never got to cut with them, but I think the next time I get my hands on them, I will. I'm always like scared to use other people's knives. I'm happy to beat the shit out of my own knives, but I'm always not that they can't handle them, but it always makes me anxious to use other people's knives.
Yeah. I mean, I only use them if I know the customer and he used them before. I would
Yeah,
never use a foreign knife for the first time,
right.
other than if I bought it.
Yeah, yeah. That's so cool. It's fun. So, do you have other collaborations lined up for the future?
I have a cool one lined up with Goldsmith, with David Wolkersdorfer. He's an Austrian knife maker and I think master goldsmith. Can you say that like that? I don't
Sure.
know. He makes jewelry and knives.
Maybe I think in the States we call them a jeweler or a metalsmith that
Or jeweler,
specializes.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, in German it's a goldsmith translated. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, but a collab with him and
Yeah.
with Tobias Hangler as well.
Cool.
So yeah, looking forward to
That's
that.
great. I love it. Well, if you ever want me to send some steel, how does that work? Send for Joshua to send the steel to, because I'm like, oh, I would love to send some steel to you to use in a collaboration. But
I mean, we can totally make that happen if you want to waste some steel on me.
no, it wouldn't be a waste. I
uh,
wanted to ask you. I pulled some of these pictures off your or off your Facebook too,
yeah,
where you're getting some very interesting alloy banding, and
yeah,
I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing about some of that activity that you're getting in some of your blades.
yeah. I mean, it shows up when I edge it, of course, only really.
Yeah,
Before that, you can see it, and it only shows up in the steel I mainly use. It's 12519. It's tungsten alloyed high carbon steel, and it, the knowledge around it is pretty limited as far as I know, because I had
yeah.
very qualified guys say rather different things about it, and also the lecture doesn't really um, tell you much about it.
You said it's
Um,
12519.
yeah, 12519. That's the German
Okay.
DIN norm for it. It's um, I don't know what the equivalent. I think no, W2 would be the equivalent probably in
Oh,
the
interesting.
US, something like that.
Yeah.
It has 1.10% carbon,
Oh, wow.
1.5 tungsten,
Yeah.
chrome, and manganese. That's about, yeah. Um, Similar to Aogami, I think.
Okay.
We are one of the Aogamis.
That's great.
Yeah, and it just shows up in that steel. I mean, as far as I know, it's when the steel is produced, so it's molten, and then it's poured into a container of
Mm,
sorts,
to make an
and
ingot.
then solidifies. And
Yeah.
while it solidifies, it builds dendrites within it,
Yeah.
because the faces will solidify with different alloy contents in order to solidify, and parts of the cast will stay liquid due to their different alloy content. So it will solidify. You can kind of think about it as a tree. So
Mm,
the outer surface areas will solidify earlier, and the tree kind of stays liquid longer and then solidifies. So it segregates, the alloy content segregate a little, and then there are ways in steel production to even that out, but you can't always you can't ever perfectly even it out
okay.
with that process, and that's essentially what you're seeing. You can't measure hardness difference within those lines you're seeing, so
Yeah.
it's not the difference in alloy contents isn't that big that you could really measure hardness difference, because if you would say like the bright spots have way less carbon and the dark spots have way more, or another alloy content like,
Sure.
let's say, chromium or whatever,
Yeah.
then you could measure hardness difference between them. But um, I've never heard someone being able to do that. That tells us that it's very little difference you're actually seeing,
Yeah.
probably in manganese content or whatever. But that's where I said no one ever sufficiently explained to me convincingly, in the
Yeah.
sense also that some guys contradict themselves. Some guys
Mhm.
that could know, should know, whatever. So yeah, it's difficult to explain. But I mean, for the customer, it's nice to see there isn't a, a perceived downside to it in performance. So it's not like
Right.
the material has any weaknesses or something like that, and it
Yeah.
only shows when you etch it.
Yeah.
So if yeah,
Yeah, no, and I think from what as I've learned or tried to learn about Woots and Woots patterning and what develops the pattern, um, and what's helping to form the pattern, not only just like not in Woots material from ancient times, but also modern materials like you're working with, creating a similar thing, and that it is actually carbides forming around alloying elements within the steel, and somewhat what you're seeing, what look like layers or bands, are just carbide depleted areas, and then carbide rich areas, and then carbide depleted, and so on. So you kind of get this kind of swirling pooling effect from
yeah,
different kind of density of carbide. But again, at the same time, like, this is pretty close up shot that we're showing right now,
yeah,
and
yeah,
those bands, those lines you're seeing, or those the appearance of lines and clouds and swirls are very fine, and which means those carbides are extremely small
yeah.
and they look to me at least very uh, spread out throughout the material pretty evenly.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I wonder if you could Vickers hardness test hardness difference within woods. I mean, I know in woods it's the structure or texture you're seeing is more pronounced than with the steel
Sure.
I'm using.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there is hardness difference you could measure or not. I haven't ever read, but I think your colleague Peter Bird,
Yeah.
Swatchbird,
Yeah.
might know more about that. I didn't ever ask him actually, but now that we are talking about it, I wonder if there is also no hardness difference or if there is.
I
I
mean, I'm sure
For me,
there's
it's interesting.
I mean, I think there's just naturally, if you're looking at a carbide rich region of a particular knife versus kind of a carbide depleted area, there's going to be a slight difference, but because of how fine that pattern is,
Yeah,
as a performing tool, it's perfectly fine. It's
yeah, yeah,
not it's
can
not going to
yeah,
take away from the performance of the knife or anything.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's very cool, and I've seen it more and more. I see people getting those patterns, and I don't think it always shows up even within the same material, because again, it comes down to what plant made this steel, and how they cast it exactly, and what portion of the cast it came from. And I think there are some portions of the material that has more of kind of like that sweet spot where those kind of patterns develop versus other areas of the steel. And but I've seen it. I think people call, was it spicy white, but
yeah.
the 26, what is it?
C3.
C3, yeah,
Yeah,
26 C3. I think A2. I've seen people accomplish this kind of steel, and then also, yeah, like origami. I think it's like blue or blue two, or and some of the other um, uh, Hitachi steels and stuff like
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I don't. Yeah,
Even
I don't know.
5100, honestly, but they're typically steels that have some sort of alloying content beyond, um, some sort of like molybdenum, carbon, or sorry, chromium, tungsten, vanadium.
It's
Um,
it's
yeah,
it's the alloying content for one. I mean, with woods, it's definitely a lot of that, as far as I know. But I'm very limited in knowledge on that.
sure.
But I know it's the production process mainly because with Apex Ultra, which is produced in ESR process, so that's kind of the process that was before powder metallurgy.
Okay.
So it's molten again, and then it droplets. It's solidified.
Okay.
So in order to not have those dendrites form. I think, as far as I know, the ESR is mainly to prevent that from happening. And when I edge the Apex Ultra, it's just completely monotone,
Yeah.
or completely uniform.
Yeah.
Nothing showing.
Yeah.
But with the other steels, I think forging kind of provokes it, or enhances it. I think either it's the thermal cycling
Yeah.
between heat up, cool down, heat up, but I'm not entirely sure. I can just say with some knives it shows more
Yeah.
with me, and some it does less. Even though my steel all is from the same batch, I all bought it at once, and I have a certificate saying it's from the same batch. So steel contents can't really be the issue here. Either
Right.
it's my etching or my process, but something on my end.
Right.
That yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting, and it's super interesting that we don't really know more about it. I mean, as far I heard only theories about it that make more or less sense,
Yeah.
and some of them overlap, but some contradict themselves a little. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think while and I don't know, I don't think people hold like a metallurgist like John Verhoeven up like gods, but I do think they think very highly of, and I think rightfully so. There, he has put out a lot of good information, but I think when it comes to the Woots stuff, he unfortunately has written a lot of scientific articles around it, and I think they allude to various aspects of the process for developing the patterns. And while the articles, the way they're titled is like how to make patterns in or recreate Woots patterns in steel, almost nobody has been able to replicate the process or the patterns. And I don't
Okay.
think that's on the people. I think it's actually they John Verhoeven has very craftily written an article that purports to share how that's done, but doesn't actually very clearly share it so that it can actually be replicated. Because I think that's the idea of science, and especially scientific articles, if somebody reports on something, so that others can then turn around and try to replicate those results to kind of basically verify that that is actually work, or that actually works, versus it just being a fluke one-off thing. And for a long time it's continued to be, this is great, they rediscovered this, and it's like, but nobody has been able to replicate those patterns properly off of the information that they've shared in those articles. I'm sorry, I don't really hold them too highly personally, but
Yeah, no, I
yeah.
mean, I get that, but I don't think. I mean, the question is if he intentionally did that. But what I would suspect, but I don't know a lot about
Sure.
Verhoeven.
Yeah.
But what I would suspect is that the same thing happens that I see a lot of older guys do, and I think it's a big mistake. Since they are so long in the game and they have so much knowledge, they kind of start to assume, and I catch myself doing that sometimes. They kind of assume that everyone around them is on the same knowledge base, so
Uh-huh.
they don't have to explain all those little details they take
Sure.
for granted, anyways.
Yeah.
And I think they lose themselves in the detail a little.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I know when I made my website, and I'm not old nor am I too long in the game, I
How old
really
are
had
you?
to 35.
35. Okay.
I really had to take myself out all the time and think about what would a layperson read right now,
Mm.
and try to really write things from the, like, so in order you don't have to need any knowledge bases.
Yeah.
You can read it and understand it within itself
Sure.
without, yeah. And I think, I mean, I could only imagine, like, hearing you describe what he wrote, that he maybe assumed that the reader has some detailed knowledge
Oh,
already.
right. Yeah. Sure.
But I mean, I just know some old knife makers who sadly don't communicate all the details and all the effort they go through, because they take for granted that everyone knows that
Right.
already.
That's a good point. That's a fair point for sure.
Yeah.
Um, God, my brain's so terrible. I keep thinking of something else to ask you, and then what I need to be doing is trying to write notes while I'm thinking about it. Um,
I'm the same way.
yeah, you make your own Damascus from time to time in San Mai. Um, do you?
Only
Oh, that
San
one's got a
Mai.
little. Always San Mai.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
yeah, that one is made by Jonas Jansson, Isas Median on
Okay.
Instagram. He's a talented Swedish maker.
Okay.
That piece was some crazy Damascus he he sent me.
Yeah, that's very good. But you make your own from time to time,
Uh,
and
yeah, the Damascus I don't, but the San Mai, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, no, you're good. And is there a particular reason you don't play in Damascus very much?
I mean, the San Mai somehow the Semi somehow developed. I mean, early on, back in the blacksmith shop, I had, of course, I think like every knife maker at the beginning, huge problems with warpage during hardening.
Sure.
So I was using mild steel again since it was available as a
Yeah.
jacket, pretty much making Japanese knives,
Yeah.
uh, if you think about it. And then I was able to straighten it after quenching. And I mean, as a side, as a small, you know, off-topic thing, I think because many people keep saying that the Japanese only had their Sanmai process due to the lack of high-end steel, or that high-end steel wasn't available. But I think, I mean, if you're a knife maker yourself, I think you're very aware of the problem of warping, especially when you quench in water. So
Y-
my theory is that that at least had to play a role, but I've never heard someone actually say that. But my thinking as a knife maker is, if I was to harden monosteel knives in water, I would kill myself before doing that because the blades come out like whatever. I
All
don't
messed
think,
up. Yeah.
yeah. So, but that's, yeah, that's a more off-topic thing. Um, yeah, and I started with that, and then I started forge welding stainless steel cladded knives
Okay.
or stainless steel sanmai.
Yeah.
Yeah, stopped doing that due to a lot of technical issues. I don't know. And then I recently made a knife,
Oh,
which was,
was the stainless stuff coming apart?
yeah, yeah, exactly
Oh
down
wow.
the middle.
Oh
It
wow.
cracked down the middle. So the cutting layer itself cracked along the side the blade.
Right.
You kind of, you sometimes, if you, I mean, you sometimes see that with other makers as well,
Yeah.
pulling knives out of the cryo treatment or out of the quenching oil, split open
Yeah.
like two bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was happening a lot, and or a lot. I mean, I'd say, yeah, 50% of the time, maybe a little less. But then again, I'm a fan of a controlled process, and despite me trying different things like quenching different and all that, I couldn't figure out why it was cracking. I'll tell you an interesting
Mm.
thing. I had one time I hardened
Yeah.
3 stainless steel Sanmai blades. All were Kyotos from the shape. They were pretty similar.
Okay.
Um, I treated them, then I tempered them, had them lay overnight in the shop. So they were done, no cracks.
Okay.
Next day, I put them into the hydrochloric acid to, you know, the forging scale on the stainless steel is very tough and very
Right.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to get that off beforehand. So before grinding, I put them into cold hydrochloric acid, so room temperature, let's say.
Okay. Yeah.
And they, after half an hour or so, they came out split open, all 3 of them,
Oh
for
my God.
no perceivable reason. There was no
Yeah.
temperature impact. I discussed this with Tobias Hangli a lot, since he's a trained metallurgist, and he can only think about the acid having some super small pitting into the carbon steel, inducing a crack, inducing tensions.
Hmm.
That's the only thing he could come up with.
Wow.
Um, but that's what I'm saying with an
Yeah.
uncontrolled process. It was just randomly splitting open on me at all different kind of stages, at forging, at hardening, in the acid bath. So that's why I stopped.
Right.
And yeah, then I started, recently had the first complete stainless steel Sanmai with hardened cladding also. So it was two different stainless steel I forged well together,
Okay.
and that that was a very nice result. I think I
Yeah.
liked that a lot.
It stayed
And
together on you. It didn't fall apart.
yeah, it stayed together. I mean, the reason why I used hard cladding is not only because the knife couldn't be deformed afterwards, because with soft cladding you can always bend the knife to a
Right.
certain extent and it stays
Right.
bent. So, but also it behaves like monosteel in every way. It's
Yeah.
it's it's hardened throughout. You only see the difference in the two kinds of steel. It's essentially like the Damascus you're making. It
Right.
behaves like monosteel as well. It's just two different kinds of steel that show after etching.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the thinking. And yeah, regarding the Damascus, I never really got into it, and I think, I mean, there are so many guys like you and yeah, Joshua and Nick Anderson and Willem Brigham, um, Xerxes in Germany, who are so talented. I just didn't see myself getting into all that, where I already had a base where I was working out of, and
Sure.
it gives me the opportunity to have nice collaborations now,
Sure.
since I don't do it. So it worked out just fine in
Yeah.
that sense.
Well, I think also, at least from what I recall from the kitchen knife forums, a lot more people are more interested in at least mono steel edges, um, than the Damascus stuff. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. I mean, mm, I can tell that some people absolutely don't prefer soft cladding,
Sure.
because
Okay.
mild steel or even wrought iron, that's even worse in those regards. It looks nice because with the kasumi and all, it can have a
Yeah.
very nice look, but it stains food way more than a monosteel uh, knife would do, especially onions and acidic stuff like that. It
Right.
just produces more of a smell and more of a discoloration.
Yeah.
Many people don't mind. I wouldn't mind too much either, but I know from the forums that that's kind of an issue. Never heard that Damascus is an issue though. But I mean, I
Oh,
I, I don't doubt it. I
sure.
think, yeah.
At least the last time I remember spending much time in there, just a lot of people they weren't necessarily poo-pooing it, but for them it was really about cut performance or cut presentation. I can't remember, but talking about how, yeah, they preferred monosteel, either monosteel knives or sand mine knives, so that they had at least a monosteel edge.
Okay.
And that's actually that that informed some of the different patterns that I created that were still mosaic Damascus patterns, but that would still have a monosteel edge along
Yeah.
the cutting edge. Um, yeah. Okay. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think there's something to be said about the uniform edge. I
Yeah.
mean, if you look at the science of how an edge dulls, then it's always at a spot that induces the wear, in a sense. So that
Hmm.
could be in a monosteel edge, that could be a microscopic chip that you just
Oh,
had
sure.
from a carpet breaking out or something like that,
Right.
and that spot then is more prone to wear, and the edge will wear from there on. So I can only think about people complaining about that. Then on the other hand, again, Tobias Hangler, I talk to him a lot, he's my work wife. uh, he said that he found out that some Damascus knives, depending on the pattern, can produce kind of self-sharpening, or kind of serrated edge in a microscopic sense,
Hmm.
that cuts really well, since it has those differences in steels and
Yeah.
maybe small steps in it. It's kind of toothy and
Yeah.
can cut really well. So I think, yeah, another topic that has to be
Yeah, for sure. And that's
studied.
actually what Tobias was describing. That's been my experience with Damascus. And it's definitely something I take into consideration when I'm trying to design my patterns, is to have at the edge. I mean, sometimes it's just not part of the overall aesthetic, but I do find that if there is a lot of changes of
Yeah.
pattern, pattern variation along the edge, it will have a sense of staying sharper longer because of the variance, the slight variance in hardness, and the way it results in the way it wears. It's
Yeah,
it instead of having micro serrations, it has quite a bit larger serrations, but still has an effect of cutting very aggressively and nicely for a longer period of time
yeah,
before then ultimately having to go back and sharpen the knife again.
yeah.
And
I can totally see that.
yeah, and so, but I do think that there is a time and a place for a or a mono steel edge, especially when it comes to the way the aesthetic of the cut being part of the presentation of food, like in sushi or something like that. That is, I think, Damascus is not what you want for sushi or
Okay.
any kind of presentation cut night or presentation cut food. You want to have a consistent monosteel edge that will provide you with a consistent cut in along through the material, that so that when you present it, the cut is part of the presentation. It looks right and it looks good and it clean, so it doesn't
Yeah,
look kind of like ragged or torn.
yeah.
Sometimes
I get
you can get with
it.
some Damascus stuff and Damascus cuts. Um, your packaging game. Do you have time to talk about packaging game?
For sure, I have time for everything.
Because I know it's getting late over there for you. It's probably
Mm,
almost midnight.
don't worry.
Okay,
No,
I
yeah,
was past.
don't worry. I'm free. I'm
Okay.
free to go.
Um, you have over the years you've done some really it seems like you're continually experimenting with the way you package your knives. But I've always really liked the way you're doing it. Can you talk about kind of like where it started and how it's progressed over the years, and if you feel like you've settled on something, or you kind of jump back and forth depending on the type of knife?
Yeah,
Yeah,
um, I mean, packaging was always difficult for me just because of the variation in size of knives I'm making. I mean,
sure.
some of my knives are patties,
Yeah,
or paring knives, super small.
yeah,
Then I have made 350 millimeter cutting edge, overall length like 500 millimeter or something,
yeah,
Tsuchihikis. And then I've made Chinese cleavers, which are about 240 millimeters long, and the height is 110 millimeters. I don't know in inches. That would be eight
I can.
inches long, and
Yeah,
uh, yeah, and over 4 inches high.
yeah,
And the Tsuchihiki would be probably like 12 to 13 inches or something. So
sure.
uh, just super high variation in blade dimensions,
Yeah,
and that puts a problem in front of you if you're ordering packaging in any kind. You have to either order it that big that all of your knives fit into the same package, essentially,
right,
or you order several variations of packages. And I looked at the prices and just wasn't very convinced that the addition in costs for the customer was worth it. That's what it breaks down to.
excuse me.
Gesundheit. I only
Yeah.
know the German word.
No worries.
uh,
Excuse me.
so yeah, then I was looking into ways of being flexible with that, and I ended up wrapping it into a black paper. But that's just the outside. I mean, the inside. What I'm very happy with is I mm, I wouldn't say I developed. I just made some paper sires happening. So they are just some vegan leather. They sell it as vegan leather. Essentially, it's thick cardboard,
Yeah.
and I just fold it in half. Um, I size it to the blade I'm packaging, and I fold it in half. And then there is how do you say it when you with those metal clamps stick paper together, in the office.
Oh, like
Forgot what it
Brad,
is.
or yeah, kind of like a stapler, but yours
Yeah,
is a paper.
stapler, exactly. And there are staplers that don't have those metal clasps, but they staple the paper within it itself,
Right.
so it holds up. So
Yeah.
I'm connecting the paper with that, putting the blade in there, obviously oiled and all that, with oil
Right.
paper wrapped around it, and then I'm vacuuming the knife itself within some plastic vacuum packs.
Right.
Um, And I do that because honestly, I had at the beginning very many problems with stains, rust, and things along those lines.
It's
And
just in transportation?
yeah, transportation, but also due to my own faults. When I
Okay.
was packaging up a blade, maybe one time only touching it on the primary bevel for some reason, for some stupid
Oh.
reason, and then unpackaging it with a fingerprint on the side of the blade, something like that.
Yes, yes, I do. Sadly, I
And
do.
yeah, and that's where I just started to make my packaging game no compromise at all. I'm at a certain point. I'm not touching my blades with bare hands anymore. I'm just
Sure.
working with gloves. I'm vacuum wrapping them, and yeah, I'm just and since then I had no issues. I mean, since over 2 years, no issues
Oh, wow.
whatsoever.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm happy with it now, but it was a struggle, man.
I believe it.
I tell you what, I had as edge protection, I had a rubber edge protector you can buy with
Okay,
sheet metal and stuff like that. You can
okay.
buy those things for that, and I used it for the cutting edge of the knife. Turns out, rubberized plastic, um, most likely due to the sulfur in the plastic, can corrode your carbon steel.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Really?
and it's
I did
just
not know that.
just a very slight stain against the light. It's nothing crazy, but
Right.
every time or every so often, retailers were asking, "Did you see that, or was that there before?" and things like that.
Oh, god.
And it
Yeah.
took me so long to figure it out. Actually, again, talking to my work wife, Tobias Hangler, he then explained plastic, sulfur, steel, not good.
Right.
And he said that might have been the issue. So yeah, packaging is a struggle, or
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
have, I'm working on getting some pictures in here to share of your packaging game. Well, and I think, something else that I really admire, and I'd be curious for you to talk about maybe some of your processes for helping to, I guess, economize your time and be more efficient with the time you're using to make your work, because your work is really, really, I think is really highly refined. It's very, very nice, and it's high performance, and but it's still accessible at a really high price. And I think, or sorry, at a reasonable price. And I think a lot of makers, and I'm one of those people where I was like, as quickly as I can get my prices up, the better, and as quickly as I can get the most money I can get as possible for my knives, the better. And I think you've shown a great deal of patience, um, and I guess kind of appreciation to your customers and clients, that your prices don't just jump up really quick, and you again, because you have the reputation and the demand for your work, that you really could start pushing your prices up. And so I guess, um, that was a lot of questions. I guess first, let's let's talk about pricing, I guess, a little bit. We'll start at the end and then work towards what I was saying before about
uh,
production and stuff like that, and how production plays into pricing. Because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, is trying to figure out, where do I price my knives? Do I start by figuring out how much money I'm trying to make per hour or per day, and then factor that into however many hours or how many days it takes to make a knife, and then that's the price of the knife? But then the question is, can I sell the knife for that much money? If that
yeah.
ends up being, $2,000, will anybody? Do I have then the leverage or the reputation or the demand for my work that I can even sell it at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, to find the correct price,
Yeah,
obviously is always very subjective, and
right,
depends on what you set out to do. I mean, there are some hobby makers. They don't have a lot of pressure regarding the financials usually,
sure,
given they have a full-time job
right,
at the side. But then, if you're a full-time maker, you really have to at least make as much to sustain a comfortable living from it. Otherwise, I mean, as sad as it sounds, but we don't have to be so romantic to think that the job has only to be fun. It needs to earn your living at the end of the day. I'm very
Right.
convinced of that, and I think, I mean, I'm I'm saying that quite honestly, despite it sounding rude or something like that. But I got into knife making for the money mainly. I mean,
Sure.
it's not that I'm getting rich from it, but I'm earning more than being a blacksmith, and I knew I had a future compared to being a blacksmith. You know, I told you that
Mm,
I was uh, had no chances of promotion. So getting self-employed, at least my fate was in my own hands, and I knew
right.
I could control it one or the other way, either working more or asking more for the knives. So that's that. And I think saying that a job only has to be fun and money is secondary is just not true. I mean,
Sure.
it both play a role and both have to be addressed. Um, yeah, but regarding pricing, I mean, it's a very conscious decision of mine to not jump the prices up just according due to the demand, and I'm very thankful demand is there. But I think it it would put me in a tight spot as soon as the knives don't sell as good anymore, or as soon as the demand isn't there anymore, and I don't know how to really compensate for that. Then I
Right.
think I can't just reduce the price, because that would raise some questions about transparency, and you know, the customer would just ask, why is it cheaper now, the same knife, you know, like
Right.
that.
Yeah, you're diminishing
um
the value of something that somebody just maybe even just a week or a month prior had
yeah,
paid. Now you're
yeah,
saying that same knife or something similar to that knife is 30% less valuable or something like that
exactly.
because
Yeah,
of
that I think that wouldn't really work out.
no.
And so I'm trying to stick to my prices as good as I can. But I will tell you, I ran into problems with that. You
Okay.
surely know that, and every other knife maker listening to that knows that. But I, all the time, every single batch, I'm um, making some new things, or putting some new details in my knives.
Right.
Imagine like the insides of the drilled holes, or just talk about the screws. Back then, I just took the screws out of the packaging and used them. Now I'm bead blasting them.
Oh,
Calculated down to the knife, that's maybe 5 to 10 minutes more work. I have a little jig, I put the screws in, then
yeah.
uh, go to the sandblast cabinet, bead blast them, and then take them out again. So it takes me an hour to bead blast them screws for all the knives. So, you know,
Right.
per knife, it's not a lot of work, but adds up. And every batch I'm doing things like that. And once you improve little things like that, you can't leave that out. But you can't
Yeah.
raise the price accordingly either, because that's for a custom order a customer gave you 1 year ago. So he
Right.
essentially gets better quality, not paying for it. And I have struggled with that, because all the time I'm improving, but not asking more for it. um
Mm,
and
yeah.
that's why I started to every year have an adaptation of the price to the inflation, not for given custom orders, but for every new custom order, it will cost more to the factor of the inflation
Right.
I'm calculating with.
I think that, I mean,
So
and I think that seems fair. And but I totally understand what you're talking about is when you start to make improvements on your knives, and then
yeah,
how do you, and especially when it adds more time to your process.
yeah,
You're just like, all right, well, that was actually an extra, whatever, 5 hours on this knife at $100 an hour, then that all of a sudden bumps up the price quite a bit. Um, yeah, and so yeah, how do you justify that stuff and how do you figure it out? And I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer. Maybe you just try to make it up over time, or is it a thing you do for yourself as an improvement on your process, or
I mean,
yeah,
the motivation, of course, is to put a better product out there,
Sure.
and once you do that, I mean, even once you have the thought of doing that sense, because you won't go back to less quality or less beautiful again, even if you're not getting paid.
Right.
The bead blasted screws are standard for me now, and if I look
Yes.
at them uh, out of the package now, I could never use them as they are. They're just not, the finish doesn't match up, you know.
Sure.
Back then I didn't mind, but back then I didn't know I could beat blast them, or it didn't appear to me. But
Right.
you know, once you implement that, it's really gone. It's done. It's done. You can't
Yeah.
undo it. Um, but yeah, over time you have to compensate for that, and there is only one way, anyways, in a how do you say it, free market society with inflation and all that. So the knives have to get more expensive over the years. I think Will Stelter recently put out a calculation um, of someone selling a knife in 2002 for the same price now, how much less a profit they make on it. It was a crazy number due to inflation. Just,
Oh, if they're sharing,
interest
if
of
they're selling
interest.
it for the same price, I see. So if they're
Yeah,
not, if the prices don't continue to grow with
yeah,
inflation,
yeah. And most
yeah,
knife makers don't at least most knife makers I know
yeah,
don't. I mean, they will raise their prices, but not by yearly inflation rates.
right,
And I get that. I didn't do it from the beginning either, but I think it's a thing you have to do in some way. I mean, it doesn't have to be yearly, but in some way you have to adapt for that.
for sure.
In
Yeah,
Yeah.
somewhere you have to close that gap because yeah, it doesn't make sense to be doing better work and getting paid less for it.
Yeah,
Um,
and even if you stay at the same quality level, you lose the three, or in Austria it's 8% right now for the year, 8% of inflation. I mean, calculate 8% from 1,000 euros. That's that's 80 euros you're
yeah,
losing,
80. Yeah, yeah, and it
and
adds
that's
up.
that's not that's not that's not peanuts. I mean, that's fucking 80 euros
Yeah,
just from
that's
1 year.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's just, pricing is difficult. It's difficult, but yeah, due to the output and all that, I can sustain a good living. But I always tell the guys. Recently, a discussion broke loose in the KKF regarding my prices, and I
okay,
thought about engaging. I did not, but if I would have engaged, I would have explained to the guys complaining that most likely I'm earning less per hour than every single one of them. And
yeah,
you really have to think about that in that way, because everyone complaining, I get it, the knife is fucking expensive as it is there,
yeah,
but I have to ask that price, especially if you think about me really earning less than probably every single one of them. Maybe there are exceptions, but I'm not in the
yeah,
top 10%. That's for sure.
sure. No,
Um, yeah, and people forget the overhead, the costs of running a business, especially in Austria, or the taxes
yeah,
over here are crazy.
yeah. I mean, at least here in the States, at the end of the year, or yeah, every time we pay taxes, like what is it? Something like 35, 36% of everything that we've earned is gone to taxes.
Yeah,
And so automatically, if you make $100,000 in a year, you're bumped down to, you know, yeah, what is that?
yeah,
65,000,
yeah,
and
just
that's
like that.
it's a okay living. It's not $100,000 though. Trust me, I would rather have that extra $35,000 to save or to travel or to not have to work my ass off every fucking day and take more days off so I'm not so I don't
Yeah,
feel like
for
I'm
sure.
struggling.
I mean, I broke it down once with my, so all the income I make,
Yeah,
I personally get 25% of that. So there is, but that's not only taxes, I have to say. That's taxes, that's rent, that's, materials, grinding belts, machines, whatever.
yeah,
But if you think about a 1,000 euro knife, you think you're giving me that money. I mean, you do, of course, as a customer, but it's not like I'm putting those 1,000 euros into my
It's not
pocket.
going straight
I,
into your bank account.
no, I'm getting 200 of those, and
Yeah.
that's why the badge has to be so big to sustain a living. So yeah, and I get it. I mean, I was on the customer side way longer than I was on the self-employed side, and
Okay.
I didn't understand it before I was on that side either. And
No.
that's why, again, I'm making an effort of not justifying myself, but explaining to the customer or prospect customer, interested guy, what is really going on, because I think, yeah, not many people know, and how would they,
Yeah.
if you don't tell them? It's, yeah. Oh, but pricing is a difficult thing. And then
Mm.
also there's the bad conscience. At least I always have that. As soon as I ask a certain price for my knife, I'm always questioning myself: is that justified? Is it too much? Is it worth it, and all that?
Yeah.
And I mean, I trick myself by now. I figured out a good trick. I always say that, but it's just so valuable to me that I think other guys can learn from it too. I'm telling myself every cent I'm not asking or not taking for that knife is a cent I'm taking out of my children's pocket.
Yeah.
Every cent I'm gifting the customer in reducing the price,
Hmm.
I'm taking out of the pockets of my children, and that really helps me to be on hard as and just
Sure.
stick to the higher price if in doubt.
Right.
Yeah, but it's difficult. It's
Yeah. It really is. But I think you find ways to you have found really great ways to um expedite your process, or keep your process. I don't know, it's not necessarily as simple as, because obviously you're doing all these crazy grinds, but just like the way you make your knives, the workflow plays to in the favor of a customer to help keep those prices low. I mean, one perfect example is that you most often are doing machine finishes on your work, which are phenomenal machine finishes. And I think a lot of us could benefit to learn more or better understand how you get such great machine finishes, because the machine finishes are so good. And it's hard. I mean, I'm looking at this one right here, and it's hard to tell that that's a machine finish. You really have to be looking at it really close to be able to
yeah.
even start to see scratches that aren't going down the length of a blade. That's the funny part. Is like, I don't know who it was that decided that the scratches need to go down the length of the blade, but the reality is, scratches are on there whether they're spine to edge or heel to tip. Yeah,
I'm a very stubborn guy, and I asked myself that question, didn't come to a satisfying answer. So
sure.
I just approached it in the sense of not giving a, a fuck about it, and just uh, having the machine finish. But I mean, the machine finish, it is faster when it works out, but
Sure.
it is also very hard to do. Not only do you
Sure.
have to build yourself a grinder, in my opinion, especially if you're grinding the edges so thin like we do with kitchen knives. With
Right.
with outdoor knives or EDC knives, the relationship of thickness at the edge, especially to material. The more material there is, the less risk of overheating it is.
Right.
Yeah, so if you're grinding a big surface area of something very thin,
Yeah.
then the risk of overheating is way bigger, and that's the
Absolutely.
case with kitchen knives. So that's why I built myself that water cooled grinder, and that way it works. But the downside still remains that even at low speeds, it just takes off so much material that the most difficult thing is to um, produce a very thin edge without an overgrind, yet thin enough. So it would be easy to have a thick edge with a nice finish. That would be super easy,
Sure.
like a Zwilling or Wüsthof
Right.
edge, pretty thick.
Yeah.
That would be no problem at all. I could let my mother do that. That would be no issue on the machine. But having that balance of super thin, just at the right time, achieving that finish, because you can't leave the edge too thick with a coarse finish, because the belt would take off too little. Then it would take too
Right.
long. You have
Yeah.
to be right at the right spot there, and then yeah, I'm just saying it's still difficult.
Yeah,
It's saving you time, but it's difficult to do in a sense.
sure.
Yeah, but the batch work helps a lot with the efficiency. I mean, I'm drilling the holes for the end caps. I'm drilling all the holes for the handles all in one step. I have my little trolley. I put the handle materials down there, drive to the drill press,
Yeah,
then drill all the holes, make all the handle inserts and all that. So it's all batch work. And that, I mean, I couldn't even tell you how much longer it would take me if I would make every single knife start to finish. But
mm.
I'm very confident in saying it would at least take me 3 times the time.
Oh wow.
I
Yeah,
I'm because changing the belts on the grinder, changing the drill bits on the drill press every time. Whereas now in batch work, I don't have to do that. So
right.
the how do you say it in English? The machine maintenance time would just be so much longer. And also my time going from station to station, like in the kitchen,
Sure.
you know, um, that would really, I think that would make a big difference.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm happy with the process, but you know,
that's good. You're
always
doing a great
improvements
job.
to be.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I've done some I've done only a few or a couple, I think, small batches um that were kind of they reminded me honestly of my time working for Bob Kramer and the way I used to work for him. And for me the bottleneck is always the handles. I'm
Okay.
always doing these heavily contoured handles, and if I'm really dialed in and focused, I can get a handle shaped out in like 45 minutes. But if I'm distracted or I'm not having an on day, that can take up to 2 hours
Yeah.
then. And that's one of the places I would really love to try to figure out, because I think I ever since I what was it, like after the first couple of years when I was on my own, first on my own, and I started to get a good reputation for my work and demand for my work, I was like, oh man, this might get to a place where I need to pull somebody else into the shop. But then how do I feel confident about being able to hire somebody to do these various processes? And I figured out, I think for most of the processes, at least the gross material movement removal and stuff like that, and drilling holes and profiling stuff like that, I figured out ways to pass that on. But when it comes to the handle sculpting, I have no idea how I could ever pass that on unless I really simplified my handles down. And that I see when I see your blades. I mean, obviously there's all the forge work, there's all the grinding, but then there's all the handle work as well. And I'm just like, that has to be the thing that actually maybe takes the most time, is doing the handles. But maybe I'm completely off. But it's I see your handles. I'm like, God damn, that's a lot. It's a lot of handles.
No. I mean, they are expensive for a reason. I think
Yeah,
I calculated it. You know, I calculated it trying to take the time I'm taking for a whole batch and then dividing it into blade work versus handle work.
sure.
Um, so it's depending. If you see the handle fit up on the blade itself as handle work, then the handles are more effort. But if you see that as blade work, like I would say that, setting the tang off and
Hmm.
grinding the tang, engraving the tang, I would say that's blade work still, even
Sure.
though it's for the handle, but it's on the blade.
Yeah.
Then we are at a 60% blade versus 40% handle ratio, roughly.
Yeah.
Um, I think what people and that's kind of what's the downside of my kind of flashy knives. Um, I think what people sometimes, or at least I had the experience, what people sometimes don't see is all the stuff I put into my blades, in the sense that you can't visually see, like the fluidized sandbed I'm using for hardening or
Hmm.
austenitizing, the water cooled grinder, all that's a lot of effort to build up front. And yeah, I mean, the fluidized sandbed, I quench every blade still on its own. So hardening takes me a whole day for
Sure.
20 knives.
Yeah.
pretty much, with tempering and cryo and all that, but takes me a whole day. So I think, I think the handles are kind of a not distraction, distraction
Oh, okay.
of the effort that generally goes into my knives and also blades. Yeah, but you know, um, engraving the tang, uh, I don't know, forging for a badge like that is about 2 to 3 days,
Sure.
including the monoliths. So
Yeah.
without them, it would be a little faster. But then soft annealing, straightening, rough grinding them before heat treatment, and all that. So it ends up being a 60-40 relationship, with the blade still taking up more time than the
Okay.
handle. Yeah.
Wow.
The handle, the handle are a lot of effort with the drilling and all that, and also finishing it, because I take them apart, then deburr the edges,
Oh yeah, sure.
yeah, polish that up again, finishing. So titanium, for example, if it needs to be black, I need to take the end caps off,
Hmm.
sandblast them, quench them in oil, clean them
Yeah.
again, put it all together again.
This is
So
titanium on this piece?
yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
titanium. And
Yeah.
I beat blasted with, or beat blasted. I blasted with silicone. Yeah, some sharp grain, very
Okay.
fine. Um, uh, uh, very fine sand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but exactly what I wanted to say is that the end caps in the rough stage are kind of my guidance for grinding, because I
Mm.
mark them out beforehand, the rough shape, and when I'm holding the handle, I can grind the handles, of course, without the blade on.
Sure.
And when I'm grinding the handles, uh, I'm standing above the handle, so to say,
Yeah.
holding it onto the flat platen, let's say for a Rukaku Hanmaru handle. And the end caps with the lines scribed onto them are my guidance for the handle shape. So
Oh
they
wow.
help a
Mm.
lot. And I think that makes me a little faster in those terms.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's smart. Well, and I think also being able to, I do all my handle shaping with the handles on the blades.
Yeah.
And part of that is because they're integral knives, and so I'm wanting to sculpt the steel of the bolster at the same time as the handle material. But I can see not having to worry about the blade getting in the way of anything, how handle sculpting can be quite a bit faster or more
Man,
efficient.
my blade would look like a serrated knife, even though it doesn't. It wouldn't wouldn't have to be, because I
Yeah,
would always hit the blade. I'm such a moron with that. I'm so concentrated on the handle. I would constantly grind into the blade, I'm sure.
yeah. Do you have a separate grinder for your handles
Yeah,
than
yeah, yeah.
from your blade? You must, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a normal knife maker's belt grinder. It's not
Okay,
cooled or anything.
sure.
Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
the big one. That's the downside of the water cooling. I mean, it's very unflexible, or yeah, there's just a flat platen essentially, and
Yeah.
it's very limited in its possible use.
Okay.
What it makes me, and then another advantage is, I can grind the end caps, the rough material, out on the water cooled bed grinder. If you think about copper, for example, it heats up
Oh
so
my
fast.
God. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just can press it on. It doesn't do anything to me.
That's
So
amazing.
that's, yeah,
Sure.
that's an advantage. But it's limited because it's encased. You can't really see much. The water is
Oh, right. You have like a shield, like a
yeah, exactly.
glass.
You have to look over the shield,
Yeah.
and then the water still spills over the thing you're grinding. So with knife edges, it works because the edge is reflecting. But if you're grinding something like an end cap and the rough shape of it, and you just have a line scribed onto it, that doesn't really reflect as much
Oh, wow.
as for you to see clearly where you are. So you
Yeah.
have to take it down a little and then look again, be careful and all that.
Oh my
And
God. So you're kind of working blind in a way.
a little. I mean, you see a little, but yeah, of course, without water, it would be better.
Yeah. Yeah. Holy smokes. I did pull up some pictures of some of your packaging, and you were talking about your paper with the staples.
Yeah.
Where's that? I swear to God, I pulled one of those up. I don't
Yeah,
know
I
where
have
it
a
is
post somewhere.
now. But I have a box that you did recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
which is really cool. And I'm not sure how if that's more the vegan leather or if that's I don't
no,
know
no,
how that.
that's a separate thing.
Okay.
Those are that's actually the company of a friend of mine who I went to school during my apprenticeship with.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and he laser cuts plywood, and
Okay.
you know that the lid you can see, it's actually flexible, like almost like some, yeah, like some foil or something like that, but that's just due to the laser cut slots in there.
Right. I can see
So
it's
it's
got these very fine little slots that help
exactly,
probably
so it's
help with
still
the
connected but
flexibility.
flexible enough to fold itself over.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just got together and I bought them for a few special knives just as a kind of presentation box. But
Sure.
that's not of the not part of my usual packaging. That's
Yeah.
just, yeah.
And then this is one of your knives,
Yeah.
and it has the oil paper you
Yeah.
said, as well as the vegan leather, and then you can kind of see the staple punch
Exactly.
at the top.
Yeah, I was, I mean, dude, when I was thinking about that concept, I was thinking such a thing as a stapleless stapler doesn't exist yet. So I was thinking about building myself kind of a stamp and die to make that myself. And then I only discovered that such a thing already exists. And I was so happy that it did
Right.
because I was totally ready to build that myself.
Oh my god.
Because
And
I
then
didn't want those metal cams in there. They just suck visually,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
And
it's not a very nice presentation look to have a staple in there.
exactly,
Um,
and they could scratch the blade as well. And so
right.
I thought the just folding the paper within itself is just a way more elegant
Yeah.
solution.
So when you're packaging the knives, you put the knife in the oil paper and then in the vegan leather,
Yeah.
and then you vacuum pack the whole thing.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
the vacuum packaging is also important because it protects the edge. The vegan leather is just, you can think of it as thick cardboard,
Sure.
but if it's not vacuum packaged and you would put something against the edge with the vegan leather between it, it would still cut through. But with the vacuuming,
Mhm.
the vacuum foil holds the blade on the sides of the blade, holds it in place,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then the edge doesn't even have a chance to cut through anything
Sure.
because it doesn't get there. The vacuum is so strong, especially on the whole surface area,
Yeah.
that the blade doesn't move anywhere. So that's again a lucky side effect. I'm really lucky
Yeah.
a guy in those regards, because that's again a lucky side effect I didn't anticipate and
Yeah.
only discovered in retrospect, that it works really nice to fixate the blade in the packaging. And we all know, I mean, if you ever sent a knife to Coop for some Cooper to some for some pictures shot by Coop,
Sure.
then he will describe on his website that fixing the knife in a sense that it doesn't move is probably the most important thing you can do in shipping or packaging,
Right.
because once it moves, it will work its way out of the package, because it just cuts every time it moves. It cuts a little more, and then it will work its way out of the package. And
Yeah.
so the knife not moving is one of the most important parts in packaging, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I can also see potentially either attaching that to a board or even having a board inside the vacuum packaging that basically is a placard in a way that fits right inside of your packaging so that there isn't any soft plastic or anything around the edges. It just fits perfectly inside the package. Um, yeah, I think that I don't know if I'm making sense, but to keep it from sliding around, like you're saying, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the best solution other than that I've seen is also with Japanese knives. They are usually shipped in a way so they hold the handle in place, because
Right.
once the handle is held in place and it's nice shape to fix in place,
Yeah.
the blade can't move either,
Right.
and they're making it happen that way. That makes sense too. But yeah, for me and paper wraps and all that, I couldn't confidently um
Yeah.
comfortably ship the handles without the vacuum foil
Yeah.
holding, because I think just in the paper, wrapped in the paper, the knife would cut through the vegan leather and the paper and all that.
Right.
Yeah. And for the, for the, once the knife is completely wrapped in the paper and the visual packaging is done, um, I wrap the whole thing in cardboard, in the wave cardboard. Is there
Okay.
a name? Yeah,
Corrugated.
yeah. And
Yeah.
but just coated one side so you can bend it easily. You know what I
Okay.
mean? You can
Yeah.
roll it in,
Yeah.
and that makes sure that the blade overall, it if you have a few layers of it, if you roll it in and have a few layers of it, you
Yeah.
can't bend it. It's strong like almost your arm or something,
Oh yeah. Sure. Sure.
and that makes sure the blade is, has some nice um, soft cushioning, or and
Sure.
be bent, so
Right.
it's super stable. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's a great way of packaging your work. I think I just got a couple more pictures I want to go through that are references to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. So this one, I
Yeah.
think this is one of your pieces that. So this is the uh
S grand,
yeah
or
or I think this was has the S hook, so it's got the
oh
hook
yeah.
on the other
Ah,
side.
yeah. Okay, yeah, that was the old S hook. That's a right hand side S hook in that case.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah.
that was very cool. And then I have a picture of just so people who can pull this up and see. And obviously, you can see it on your Instagram as well. But just to get an idea of what a batch of your work looks like, I mean, I think you said 6 weeks to do a batch like this. Maybe,
It,
is that right?
yeah, roughly. I
Yeah,
mean, if I'm getting distracted, it takes longer. I think
sure.
was it that one that took longer? I think that one took longer. But when I'm working only on the batch, that's true, six
Yeah.
weeks. But sometimes you get repairs in, or
Oh, yeah,
a
true.
color piece takes you longer, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to calculate, but
Well, and
roughly.
you had four, you have four monolith knives in this particular one.
Yeah, and
And,
there is a special one as well
yeah.
that I didn't present yet. A Damastil
Oh, okay.
one, the shiny one.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just looking at this, I'm just like, oh my god, this is so much work. If I had, it would take me, I don't even know how long it would take me to make that many knives, honestly, my current pace. So yeah, it'd take a while. That's impressive. And then I wanted to share just, I think, a couple of special knives that you built. This one was a fun play. The handle folds, I mean, it seems like it folds over,
No,
but
no,
maybe
yeah, yeah, yeah. Most people thought that, but it's an interesting piece. So what's happening there is it's how do I start? I had the idea of the monolith in mind,
okay. Yeah.
and then I wanted to have the handle be titanium.
Oh, I
So I
got you.
forged kind of a titanium U shape, you can say, or
Yeah.
the handle. Um, Punched some eyes into it, so there was space for a rivet that
Right.
was also made from titanium. But behind the rivet, you can see the rivet. But behind the rivet, towards the bottom of the handle, essentially, is a hidden pin inside it,
Oh.
so it
Oh.
doesn't fold. The
Oh, interesting.
thinking behind it was just having uh, a
Yeah.
blacksmith, a classical blacksmith connection. So, like
Right.
Lin Ray, who was a big inspiration of my monolith knives, of course,
Yeah, absolutely.
has the riveted part in his handles. I wanted to have that too, but I tell you what, that punching the hole into the steel, into the very narrow. I mean, the steel at that point, without the eye in it, had about 7 millimeters width, and
Yeah.
I had to punch a hole upwards into that. So
Oh
the
my god.
drift always wanted to um, go outside, out to the side of the blade blank.
Oh wow.
So punching the hole through that was an issue. Then the drift also heated up super fast because it was only 5 millimeters in diameter, so
Oh,
it's
right.
very narrow. That's
Yeah.
what is that? One fifth of an inch.
Yeah, yeah, it's like
Super
a
thin.
almost a quarter of an inch. Yeah, like a quarter of an inch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And so yeah, but it turned out to be an interesting knife. I think it's not something ordinary.
for sure.
It's not something with pure performance in mind in the sense of comfort. I mean, it works. The edges were round. It was totally
Sure.
comfortable in hand. But if you would ask me for a knife that is used in 8-hour shifts in the restaurant, then I wouldn't recommend this
That's
one.
not the one?
No, no.
Well, it's still a really cool piece. I really like it a lot. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, "What the fuck?" I thought it
But
was
that's one of
such a
those
cool
pieces we
concept.
talked about that really keep you going, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just an creative exercise and just so much out of the ordinary um, regarding the work. You know, drilling those hidden pins into the titanium frame. I had to do some thinking as well because alignment
Mm.
had to be true
Oh,
because I had a hole in the blade plank already.
yeah.
So the way I did it is I made a sacrificial center punch
Okay.
that fit into that hole in the blade blank. Then I put the titanium with the rivet on and then punched it so the center punches are there. And then I bent the titanium frame open again in order to drill the holes because
Oh, wow. Because the
if
punches
the
are
handle
inside.
is yeah, if the handle is
Yeah.
shaped like it's attached, then I can't get to it with the drill bit, right?
You're right.
So yeah, it was a
Wow.
fun build.
And then I pulled up the pictures for your collaboration with
Yeah,
Joshua.
yeah. Yeah, there you can see the relief edge.
Yeah.
We had some welding flaw at the top at my maker's mark.
Oh, okay.
Um, we talked about it with Abe and Joshua as well. I'm not entirely sure if he addressed it, but we
Okay.
said that it's a visual flaw. It's forging those monolith knives put a lot of stress
Absolutely.
onto the steel and yeah, but other than that, I think the finish was really cool, and the transition you're seeing here is something I enjoyed a lot. But with that knife, because the forging scale being super rough, and then transitioning into the ground surface with the relief edge,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and something that I really like about brute to forge knives is that you can see, especially Damascus brute to forge. And I do this sometimes with my bench knives. You can see the pattern through the fire etching. And
yeah.
I've been trying to figure out, I would really love to do some more Damascus brute to forge knives. Um, and intentionally process the steel in a way that that it helps enhance kind of like that fire etched quality to the steel so that you're getting more of that um, in the finished piece because I
Uh,
just really love that texture a lot
yeah.
and then the contrast of it flowing, the pattern flowing from rough into really refined and
In
clean.
yeah, yeah. I did that or I tried that with the Mokume piece
Oh
that
yeah,
I call up.
yeah.
Um, After hardening, before grinding, I put the knife into the hydrochloric acid, so really
Okay,
aggressively
yeah,
edge the upper part of the knife. I mean, the pattern shows, but it doesn't quite show as refined as the fire edge, as you call
yeah,
it. I think, but I like the idea. I look forward to for you to try that because I think with your knife especially that that transition of a sharply edged very refined handle but
yeah,
with those facets with those nice facets and the contrast of the edge then that must look nice.
yeah, yeah. I'm excited to do some more of those. I've kind of I did one. I'm trying to think. Actually, I think I've maybe done a couple of them, brute to forge
Yeah,
style. Actually, one of the knives I finished up for Blade Show last year was a little bit. It was a mosaic Damascus. You can't really see the Damascus pattern too well, but it's there. in the brute to forge aspect. But I would really like to work on developing that so that it's more pronounced just in the fire etch texture before
Yeah.
even trying to do any etching or darkening for contrast or anything like that.
I didn't quite get it to work with the Joshua piece either, but now that I'm thinking about it, the Damastil piece, I didn't show it sadly on Instagram yet because I want to keep it for next DCI.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, but maybe try Damastil because on the handle section, I forged the monolith from it on the handle section, and I also etched it before grinding,
Oh wow. Yeah.
so the edge isn't coarse.
Yeah.
Um, and also in hydrochloric acid, and the handle texture really came out crazy nice. It almost looks like those, the alien figuring in the movies,
Oh
the
sure.
Geiger guy, the
Oh
art
yeah.
from that
Yeah. Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
It looks so. Maybe try Damastil if you have some handy.
I
That
actually
could.
I have some that I forged, and it's forged in a particular way, so it is a brute to forge, and I haven't finished it yet. And
Man,
maybe I'll try to finish it next year for for the DCI. But yeah, it the way the pattern it still comes through pretty well. I mean, it almost looks like it's etched in a way.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, if you don't lose anything by it, maybe put it in the acid for a couple of hours and see how it goes. And then
yeah,
I mean, etching is always on the fly with me. It's
yeah,
always put it in, look, how does it look, polish again, maybe
yeah.
put it in again. So
Yeah, it definitely needs to go in that because it still has like some forge scale on it. So I would like to take that off before finishing up the piece. So yeah, I'll probably do some etching at least to get the scale, any forge scale off. Because like you said, it can be really nasty stuff, and I don't want that on the finished blade.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
also, I mean, I talked to Hangler about that topic a lot because I had the plan to have my monosteel knives have
Mm,
with two kinds of carbon steels. So
yeah.
the 12519, the Apex Ultra,
Yeah.
but then I had plans to use stainless steel as well for them, forged and all that. And that's why I talked so much with Hangler about it. Made a prototype too, but what he said to me is that um, as soon as you have the forging scale on with a stainless steel knife, it's not really stainless at that forging scale anymore because
Hmm.
of decarburization,
Right.
mainly. I think it is. But I'm not too firm with the metallurgy of stainless steels. So,
Oh, interesting.
but yeah, well, I'm just saying the yeah, etching it off is probably anyways the way to go.
Yeah.
But I didn't do any tests either because he told me it's still pretty stainless. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it reduces the stainlessness.
Yeah,
Stainlessness.
I'd be curious. I'd be interested to hear that conversation or talk to him about that because it would seem to me if the surface has is carbon depleted, then that means that there's less chromium tied up with carbon on the surface and potentially having a decent, at least ideally, a decent stainlessness to it. But I don't know. He's the metallurgist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that you're saying it, huh? Yeah. I couldn't tell you right now either. I would have
No
to
worries.
think about it.
Yeah.
But it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah. No, it's a good. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's just a question. I really don't know. So yeah, I'll have to clean that off and maybe I'll do some experiments as I let that knife sit around and prepare to work on it for DCI for next year. But
Nice.
well, I think we just have one question from the audience that it would be really great to get to. And it's from Yerwin Nippenberg. And let's see if I can find it here. His question is, and we kind of covered this a little bit, but um, it's actually a two-part question. The first part is, do you have any tips on how to develop a recognizable style of for your kitchen knives? Because I feel like, and we were talking about maybe maker friends who don't like to put their names on their work. And I think I know I have one, and he's very vocal about it. Nick Anger is very
Yeah.
much like, I don't want my name on there at all, and because he wants his work to kind of, he doesn't want his name to have anything to do with the work. He wants the work to stand alone on kind of on itself, at least as I understand from the last conversation I had with him, is that, he wants it to be good because it's good, not because it's an anger knife or something like that. But I will say that I agree with you that I don't know if it's sentimentality or what, but I do think there's, if we're doing a good job building our knives and they potentially are at least lasting 100 years or a couple hundred years or whatever, and they end up in someone's house or in a museum or something like that, or dug up out of the ground somewhere, to have some sort of reference back to who the original creator is. Not that we're saying that we're important, but just to have that connection, and kind of to who that original maker was, and whatever their story is, if it can be found somewhere out there in the world. Because I think that's, when I love reading about history and learning about historical stuff, and especially like ancient civilizations and stuff like that, and some of these little clues and stuff they leave behind, but who they actually were, we don't really know too well. But what we do know about them is from what information, pictographically or however, that they've left on the monuments they've left behind.
Yeah.
um
Uh,
and so yeah.
so I mean, regarding Nick Anger, Ange, Ange,
Actually, yeah.
Ange,
Yeah,
um,
sorry, Nick.
I think he doesn't have a big problem with that because he makes his knives very recognizable for him, or you can always tell it's his knives. He
For
doesn't
sure.
have
Yeah.
a variation to the extent that you would wonder if that's his work. So in that sense, that's his maker's mark, I'd say.
Right. Absolutely.
But I think it's always important to have some kind of maker's mark, because to me it's a question of, as you said, reputation and communication. I don't want the customer to wonder what it is. I want the customer to know what it is, and to know that there is someone who has certain standards or whatever behind it.
Yeah.
And if there is no branding at all on a product, whatever product it is, an old tool, I always discovered that with old tools that aren't known anymore, it's very hard to find out who made it, what was put into it, what thoughts were put into it. Whereas with a brand, you can then maybe search for it in archives, Google nowadays,
Sure.
and inform yourself about the product. So yeah, to me, a brand or a maker's mark to that extent is important, mainly for that. Um, the question from Nippenberger
Yeah.
was I don't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So helping to, no, you're good.
Oh,
um
yeah, yeah.
to
Helping to.
Tips for helping to make your style recognizable, or to develop a recognizable style for your kitchen knives.
Yeah, that's a difficult one to describe. I mean, for one, I will say that I think every good kitchen knife maker I know has a style, and you guys talked in length about that. Has a style that you can immediately recognize, no matter if it's your knife, Stone Vance, Xerxes, whatever, whoever. You always, you know, uh, you see it and that's that guy, Nick Anger. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
so I think that's important. How to get there is the difficult question. I mean, for me, I I mean, many things developed organically just out of need, and then also many things developed by just making what I would want to buy or would want to see and would want to have.
Hmm.
Um, and all that also has to be done within certain technical limitations, because for example, chef's knife can only have so much variation for it to still work. Edge
Sure.
profile is kind of limited.
Right.
um, Length height relationship is limited in a sense. So but I can't give a clear answer to, that's the ABC recipe to get
Sure.
there. It's just, but I think one of the main factors besides performance and the thing to build it to work is, make something you would enjoy having, seeing, and using. I
No,
think that's an important
I think
one.
that's a really good point to make, and I think part of the reason I make my knives the way that they are is because I use knives.
Yeah,
I understand how the tool is used, or how they're used as a tool, and that informs the design. And 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 um and so then once I have kind of informed format on, or I don't know, canvas or palette that I'm working on, then I can make design choices around within kind of those constraints
yeah,
based on how I know I want it to perform. But I think that honestly, that's a really good point that you were saying before about how you're making something that you would like to buy, is that you're making informed decisions. And this was actually a question I answered in my Q&A, because I mistakenly it was for this podcast, but I read it for the Q&A. But anyways, we went through it, and a big part of I feel like I see people making design decisions that aren't informed. A lot of them are just very random, and or they're shooting from the hip, and they're not taking into consideration that like you were saying, and I was saying this before, is that the edge geometry, like you have some restraints. Like it
yeah,
still has to have a particular especially for culinary knife, a particular geometry so it performs well, a particular edge profile so it cuts well and properly,
yeah,
and used through different cutting techniques. There might be some flexibility on what the overall profile looks like, but it still should suit the purpose of the use, um, to an extent, for sure. And I think there's a lot more flexibility in the handle, but at the same time, the handle has to be comfortable.
yeah.
If the handle's not comfortable and you don't want to hold it, what use is the whole thing? Honestly,
I mean, I think one baseline should be performance first.
yeah,
I think you can compromise in certain aspects on performance, in the sense that, I mean, if I use a natural wood for the handle, for example, some guys prefer that for its feel and for its lightweight.
sure,
But really, if you look at it, objectively, it has more downsides than upsides compared to cheap plastic like POM.
yeah,
POM is super resistant against all kinds of oils and acids.
yeah,
It You can work with it. It's hard, easily work with it. It's rather hard. It's just a superior material to wood in a technical sense.
yeah,
But a wooden handle still works sufficiently enough or good enough,
yeah,
so there is a certain compromise, but performance has to come first. And then you can, it's hard to verbalize for me, but you can compromise in a certain high range. You have
um,
to fulfill a baseline of performance, and then you can compromise in a certain, so yeah, to a certain degree. um yeah, but if performance comes first, that at least makes sure that the customer has something in his hands that he genuinely enjoys.
mm,
The visuals come second, but the visuals, of course, are important too. But because in this day and age, especially marketed through websites or social media,
yeah,
the visuals at the end of the day is what sells your knife to a to an high extent. I mean, not only reviews play a role, the reputation, as we talked,
yeah,
but of course the visuals, the pictures. If the knife looks cool and nice, you you provoke the need at the customer end to want it, or to,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, and like I was
um
saying before, you do a phenomenal job, and if anybody wants to figure out how to do a better job taking photographs of their work so that is visually compelling, they should be looking at your page, because you do a really, really great job of getting into, again, to close-up shots of the nitty-gritty and details, and the things that you wouldn't normally see in the overall image. If you just see just the overall image, you get into those tight details, to show people what it looks like up close, as if they're holding it in their own hands.
Yeah, I mean those detail shots. I sometimes have things show up in those pictures that I didn't see
Oh,
by
sure.
a pure eyesight, and
Yeah,
my vision isn't bad, but it's just they are. I mean, I have a not too expensive camera, but a nice setup with a lot of light, and
yeah,
it produces pictures that are so sharp. If I zoom in, I sometimes see things that I wasn't able to see bare eyes. So
yeah,
it's
sure.
yeah, no, but website good pictures. I think it's very important. I don't think I make the best pictures out there. I mean, Abe from Eating Tools and Don Wen are a big inspiration, and I think
Yeah,
they make way better pictures than I do. But I think pictures at the end of the day are very important, as they are kind of the only way for a customer to hold their knives,
yeah,
in air quotes, before they actually receive it. So to illustrate, yeah, they are the gateway to the customer, essentially, like a
yeah,
showroom.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and one of
Yeah,
the things I was saying, because it is so difficult to distinguish ourselves, our distinguish your work from other work, because through the visual platform of social media, and the internet, it is, knives side by side could look, they might vary slightly in overall design and stuff, but it otherwise they kind of look, they both just look like knives. And
yeah,
so I think one of the things, other than really great photographs and getting close in on the details and stuff like that, that I was saying, and I think you have done quite well, especially with through your relationships with your customers, but you've developed a really strong reputation with your customers, and through your customers who are turning around and sharing to the world and yelling from the rooftops, I love Ben Kamon's knives. And you should have one too. That, I think that's really powerful, and I think that's really underestimated. I think unfortunately, I think a lot of makers are very solitary people, and for a reason, they like being by themselves or working by themselves,
yeah,
and it can be difficult to put yourself in that position to talk about yourself or talk about your work, or take that time to interact with your customers to make sure that they feel taken care of, and create that kind of level of customer service, and almost a level of hospitality, um, in the way that you interact with your customers, so that they are turned around and they are massive advocates for you. And I think that is also a big part of trying to establish kind of a recognizability. Obviously, it's not necessarily looking at the knives visually, but uh, distinguishing your brand and your company and you from other makers is literally the relationship that people have with you.
yeah. I mean, I always tried, or I tried for the longest time to make it not about me. I
Sure,
I kind of share the philosophy of Niganche in those regards,
sure,
because I kind of, I mean, that ties in again. That ties in, I'd say, to the thought of my handles being distracting from the quality of my knives, since they are so flashy in a way. um, I also thought about me and telling my story and all that being a distraction to my knives. I always kind of thought, that I want my product to speak for itself, but that went out of the window once I was on the first podcast, and was on social media a little more, showing my face and all that. So that was the initial plan, but it didn't really work out like that anyways.
yeah,
um but yeah, I think still there is something to be said. I mean, to have the product be the main buying motivator or main
sure,
factor within a purchase decision, and not myself. I don't really appreciate, I'm, yeah, as you said, we makers are weird people, and I think many of us don't really enjoy being in the middle of things.
Yeah. No,
if that's
and
fair to say.
honestly, I'm right there with you. I
Yeah,
don't like a lot of the attention on me. I want it to be on the work, on the knives.
yeah.
And I'm not talking about being self-aggrandizing or talking about me. I'm a great guy.
No, no.
What I mean is just like by relating your story, like doing these podcasts like this, taking the time to relate your story and who you are as a person, and where you come from and your background, and why you decide to make your knives the way you are or you do, and the way you interact with your customers. Those are all, that's kind of more in line with what I kind of mean about kind of um, setting yourself apart as a maker in what seems like an ocean full of makers, knife make, especially kitchen knife makers. It's very difficult to set yourself apart, and I think, but even just like the way you take care of your customers is a distinguishing way, a way to distinguish yourself from other makers, just by making it not just more than just a transaction. You start to develop a relationship in a way with these people.
No, that's right. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
of course. Obviously, I mean, we are such small businesses. If we
yeah,
would treat our customers like numbers, like Amazon does, I don't really think it would work out with
no,
the things we are selling.
absolutely,
But you're right. I mean, the communication and all that is very important.
yeah. And then Yeroin has another half part of his question. He says, "What difference in performance of your knives do you notice with using the fluidized sand bed versus a regular kiln?" So the fluidized sand bed versus kiln.
So, I mean, to be quite honest, I would never notice a difference. I think no one could like subjectively notice a difference there. We're talking like 5 to 10, maximum 10% improvement in a sense. And I have to get into the technicality a little bit. So everyone who
Sure.
doesn't know a fluidized sand bed, it's essentially a tube filled with sand that sits inside a normal atmospherical heat treatment kiln, like even heat or whatever, um, and the whole tube, including the sand, gets heated up and brought to austenizing temperature. In order for you to put a blade into there, everyone knows that who was ever playing in the sandbox. You can't just put your hand, shoulder deep into the sand
Yeah.
because it gets stiff. But if you would fluidize that sand, so pump air into it from below, then it would be like, how do you say that? Very sink in and die, the sand.
Oh,
The
quicksand.
Yeah, quicksand. It would be like
Yeah.
quicksand, and you literally can put your arm shoulder deep into that sand without any effort. It's like water.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing with the fluidized sand bed. The advantage of that is you have a very uniform heat because all that mass you're heating up, it takes a long time, but once it's heated up, um, you don't lose a lot of heat as soon as you put your cold blade blank in there, for one. And also the heat is very uniform, of course, because the sand and the convection with the air, it just spreads the heat within itself very, very uniformly.
Right.
And then the other benefit is that it heats up the steel very quickly. That's important because in heat treatment you discern between oven time and holding time, and there's a difference. Once you put the blade blank into the oven, the cold blade blank into the oven, that's oven time. That could be, let's say, just 10 minutes. And holding time is where the whole blade is already at temperature, is at austenizing temperature.
Okay.
And then it it converts the steel, the grain structure, or however you say it in English, and then for it to be able to quench. But the thing is, there is a difference between, let's say, the small width tip and the thicker parts at the tang, for example. And you want the difference to be as little as possible, and that you can only reach with,
Oh, the difference in the transformation.
yeah, with very high
Oh, interesting.
heat conduction, or
Yeah.
very good heat conduction, and that's what you reach with the fluidized sand bed. So it heats up
Interesting.
the steel very quickly and puts oven time and holding time more together. So I have a difference of about 30 seconds between oven time and holding time. It heats up the knife very, very quickly.
Right.
And
Hmm.
it's only yeah, it reduces warps, it enhances the quality, but really it's yeah, it's again one of those small steps. It's like bead blasting the small screws, like I said. It's just only one small step in the whole process of making the knife. Because if I myself, who makes those knives, was given a atmospherically heat treated plate by myself and a fluidized sandbed blade, I would never subjectively feel the difference. But the improvement, of course, shows statistically.
Sure.
If you would test it statistically over, let's say, 500 knives, it definitely would show an improvement. And yeah, it's kind of a mind game if you think about like that. But I think every improvement you can make has its benefits. Obviously, it's an improvement, and yeah, that's so yeah, it's small, but it's there, and um yeah, it's a step I took and I can't take back. But in that case, I won't take it back either.
Sure.
It's just yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really heard it described that way. The benefits of a fluidized sand bed, which I think would be similar to a salt pot,
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
that um, or a high temperature salt pot, is that the difference in how quickly the thinner cross sections heat up versus the thicker cross sections. Um, in a more I don't know, in a fluid environment, it happens more together, like you're saying, rather than just jointed in an ambient air kiln. And yeah,
Yeah, the atmospheric kiln conducts the heat through radiation, infrared radiation,
yeah,
and the liquid salt and also the fluidized sandbed is more due to not touching, but for the lack of a better word, like connecting with the steel itself, or how can you yeah, touching, essentially the medium itself,
what is
the
that?
heat.
Physical conducting.
Yeah, physical conducting, maybe,
Yeah.
possibly. And it's very interesting because you would think the molten salt bath is even quicker than the liquidized or fluidized sand bath, but they
Yeah.
are pretty similar.
Sure.
That's an interesting side fact because when you put the blade blank, the cold blade blank, into the molten salt, it forms a surface coating of um, solidified salt on the cold blade blank. And
Hmm.
since the liquefied salt doesn't have that heavy um, convection going on, it
Uh-huh.
takes some time to heat that salt back up and
Back up
melt it
and
again and
melt
get
it
to
back
the
down.
blade.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
So
interesting.
they are pretty similar. The salt would have a better conduction because
Yeah.
it's liquid and more dense
Right.
than the sand. But due to that effect, they are pretty similar. That's an interesting side fact
That
I
is
thought.
very interesting. I never thought of that. I never took that. Well, and there's always, the safety concerns of salt baths versus a
Yeah.
fluidized sand bed.
Not only safety, because I mean, for people who don't know, as soon as a water drop gets into that liquefied salt, it explodes like a volcano.
Yeah.
And fluidized sand is essentially it's bulletproof as long as you don't get into there or fall into it or touch
Oh
it.
yeah.
uh,
You don't want to just dip your hand in there.
you better not. But other than that, and also what I heard is the liquidized salt will corrode your whole workshop.
Yeah.
It's
Sure.
the salt steams are very unhealthy, and that's why I
Oh yeah, the
didn't
paper
even.
coming off. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about it in the beginning
Those
because
guys.
they're so cool,
Yeah.
but I pretty soon let that go and bought a container from Hungary again,
Yeah.
and made myself a fluidized sample that's uh, the safer route and works
Sure.
just as well in my opinion.
And are you passing air through it, or is it like a liquid nitrogen, or
Good question.
yeah,
I'm passing air through it because I'm forging anyways. I'm doing that with stainless steel too because all the decarb I'm having is mainly happening in forging anyways, especially
sure.
when I forge something for extended times like the monolith. So I have to compensate for decarb with cross section of the blade, anyways, or thickness of the blade, and have to compensate for that way. So for me, it wouldn't really make sense to put relative to air, to pressurized air, relative expensive nitrogen or any
Sure.
inert gases through that fluidized sand bed. But if you're a stock removal maker, that might totally make sense, because you then don't have to wrap the blades into foil, and it's a contained
Mm,
atmosphere.
yeah.
But the sand itself will already, I think, reduce the decarb in the heat treatment also by a little. I don't know the factor though. I
Sure.
just heard that, and it kind of makes sense, since less air is around it, less
Yeah.
air is around the blade. But yeah, you could fluidize it with an inert gas.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think we did it. We went almost 4 hours. Holy shit. That's
Nice.
amazing. Thank you so much for, I can't thank you enough for the amount of time that you've offered for this conversation.
No man,
I
thank
think
you.
there's
Really.
so much great information in there that you shared, and I have a ton of great takeaways, and I'm excited to kind of put some of the stuff to work myself, because again, I've been trying to figure out some of my processes and efficiencies and inefficiencies, and wanting to kind of change, or yeah, I don't know, change things up a little bit. I've just been doing high end all the time. I want to actually kind of like simplify things a little bit, and do more kind of production work stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what I can do after this conversation. Probably not right away, but in the future, with making some production style in-house production work and whatnot. But yeah, again, I've always admired your work since I first saw it, and I'll continue to follow you for years to come. And I appreciate you for your time and willingness to chat and share your process and your story with us.
Mareko, thanks a lot for having me, and vice versa about the work. Always
Mm,
a big inspiration, and always looked up to you and, and what you're doing. So um, I share those sentiments a
good.
lot.
Thank
Um,
you.
and always happy to talk about nerd stuff.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I hope sometime in the future we can work together. I know you got a lot going on with the business and the family, but sometime in the future it'd be great. Um, yeah,
I'd be excited, man.
yeah, I love it. Good deal. Well, I just want to thank again all the sponsors. I'll just rail through them again one last time. We have Michael Poor of Red Dragon Forge on Instagram. We have Russell Tinsley of Can't Make Knives, as well as Oozle Finch Beers on Instagram. We got Dan Hubbs of 66 Mountain Knives on Instagram and Facebook at 66 Mountain Knives. Lawrence Lake of Maritime Knife Supply. You can find him on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Maritime Knife Supply, as well as maritimeknifesupply.com. Gabe Fletcher of Anchorage Brewing and Anchorage Forge on Instagram. Eric Kidwell at District 202 LLC on Instagram, and Josh A. Weston on Instagram as Josh A. Weston, as well as the Dragon Forge at Dragon Forge EXP for the Dragon Forge experience on Instagram. And I think that's it. Again, if you aren't part of the Patreon and you want to be part of these conversations, you want to ask questions directly to wonderful guests like Ben, the Patreon is the place to make that happen. And if you join at the illuminated individual level or higher, you will be part of these conversations. You'll get the first look at all these chats and Q&As, honestly, as well. So I can be your personal knife coach, not life coach, just your knife coach. And I can help you troubleshoot and work through whatever you got going on. Otherwise, I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to chatting again another time. And until then, we bid you adieu. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.